Did you know, in Metal Gear Solid 3, the scene where Volgin tortures Snake was meant to be interactive and a lot more violent? This is, of course, the moment Snake loses his right eye. In the game's final build, it's a 1-minute cutscene the player just watches passively, while Colonel Volgin electrocutes and punches Snake to find out how much the CIA knows about him. But, in a director's commentary published in a 2005 magazine, Kojima said that the whole thing was going to go on much longer. Eventually, we ended up cutting that back. We were also going to have an option as Snake was being tortured to have the player choose either yes or no when Volgin commanded him to speak or break. But we ended up removing this feature because of things going on in the real world. We had to tone things down in terms of violence. What was happening in the real world were the headlines about the CIA and all the things they'd been doing to acquire information from their enemies. So Kojima decided it was best to cut the scene down to its bare essentials. I'm David Hayter. A few months ago, I hosted a video on this channel detailing content cut from the Metal Gear series, and today, we're going to look at even more. Did you know gaming searched through thousands of magazines from all over the world looking for old interviews, archive footage, and combed through countless Kojima tweets so they could dig up even more ideas that for one reason or another didn't make the final cut? Some were victims of censorship, others got axed due to hardware specs, and in some instances, the discs just couldn't fit all of the content they'd already created. Like in the original Metal Gear Solid, it came with 30 virtual reality missions available on the start menu, but Kojima's team actually created about 60 missions. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough room left on the disc to squeeze them all in. A year later, they released an expansion disc with 300 VR missions, but Kojima originally wanted it to be 10 times bigger, and hundreds of missions that were already fully completed ended up getting cut. In the Metal Gear Solid Integral Strategy Guide, he said, "We originally talked about 3,000. How many was it we ended up making, including the ones we cut?" Then the VR director tells him about 500, I believe. "We had a lot of free time when we were working on the European version, so we spent half of our time just playing around with the game." Then Kojima said, "I'll probably get in trouble for saying this, but we just messed around with the original game while working on the other versions. We eventually started making new VR stages during our spare time, and before we knew it, we had a whole new set of them. So, I gave a presentation about it to my superiors where I said to them, I have a confession to make. This is what we've been doing all this time." They didn't look too happy about that, but they admitted it wasn't such a bad idea, and they then asked us to make it into a proper game. They go on to say they made a lot more mystery mode missions, but scrapped the most difficult ones, leaving only 10 on the disc. In another interview, Kojima said they wanted to add a versus mode, sort of a stealth game of hide and seek, but ultimately gave up on the idea. The game was already way behind schedule. Kojima told his superiors that Metal Gear Solid would only take a year to make, but active development dragged on for almost 3 years. And besides, even if they'd had all the time in the world, the disc was already packed to the brim. Metal Gear Solid was released in Japan, North America, and Europe, and became a bigger hit than I could have imagined. I was extremely pleased with its success, but I soon started to hear requests for a sequel wherever I went. I was planning to create a completely new game at the time, but I couldn't escape my fate. I would have to direct the sequel. After committing to Metal Gear Solid 2, Kojima dreamt up some ambitious ideas to make it bigger than the first game, but only half of them made it into the final release. Even the game's opening moments got cut. Sons of Liberty blew everyone's minds when it was revealed at E3 2000, and magazine interviewers flooded Kojima, all trying to get their 15 minutes with the man. In a few of those interviews, he said AI would study your actions during the first few minutes of gameplay, then use that data to detect your age, gender, and personal interests. Different people would receive a different experience for the rest of the game, like how much blood, gore, and graphic content it would expose you to. Presumably, that meant a grown man would have a more M-rated adventure than a preteen would get. But even at its big reveal party, Kojima was already saying the PS2 wasn't powerful enough to realize all his grand ambitions, and some journalists suspected the AI opening was one of the ideas that wouldn't make the final cut. They were right. The closest thing that made it in was just directly asking the player for their info, which only affected the ending. The data appears on Raiden's dog tags, then he throws them away, discarding the identity of the player so he can form his own identity. Talking to the official Czech PlayStation magazine, Kojima said they were considering ideas to make use of PS2's internet functionality, and that Sons of Liberty probably would make use of them. He went into more detail a few months later, saying, "We do have plans for internet features, but it's really up to Sony to realize these network systems. The first, basic step would be to implement a system whereby players could exchange weapons via the internet. My favorite idea is to have an AI program, or even a real person, to play Colonel Campbell or Mei Ling. They would monitor everyone playing the game, see how well or badly they're doing, and start giving advice on how to proceed in the game. They could even give tips on life and answer all kinds of questions. Obviously, our programmers are the ones who create the algorithms of the enemies and boss characters, so it would be fun if they could actually control these characters in real time and fight the player. Talking more to the Czechs, Kojima said he also hoped to incorporate voice recognition. The magazine mentioned that Sony was working on that technology for PS2. Kojima was well aware of that fact, saying, "Yes, I would like to incorporate voice recognition technology into my game. For example, it would fit perfectly into Metal Gear. It would be enough to shout a command." The PS2 stealth game, SOCOM, later came packaged with a headset. You could play online and talk to your squad mates, or you could play offline and issue commands to AI companions. But it sounds like Kojima had something different in mind. Instead of directing teammates, players would control Raiden with their voices. Kojima had actually been talking about using voice in place of buttons since he finished MGS1. He lamented that controllers had too many buttons, and too many actions had to be assigned to each one. It was confusing, but more importantly, it wasn't immersive. He explained, "I don't want the game control to be too complex. Because it is an action game, I wanted it to be intuitive. In RPGs, you press a button and a window opens and you can choose an item. But I wanted to avoid this. Just one click activates some action. As a result, we ended up using every button on the controller, but once you get used to it, then it will be convenient. However, I do think there are too many buttons with current controllers, making the gameplay difficult. Eventually, I would like to see a voice recognition controller to make things easier." Maybe he would have had us talking to our TVs, saying things like "spray" or "answer the call." But we like to think Kojima's a bit more imaginative than that. He was aware that many fans had issues with the button-mashing torture scenes, so perhaps some kind of verbal response could have replaced them, or talking out loud can take the player through different dialogue trees. That said, the only specific function Kojima described was in an interview with Australian magazine Hyper about how players could say a character's name and the codec would call them hands-free. Kojima also mentioned an item that would have essentially needed 4 times the power of the PS2. He said, "In the initial stages of development, we invent the most outrageous weapons and items for the player to use. Unfortunately, many of them either take up too much of the console's processing power, or they ruin the game balance, so we end up weeding them out. We're playing with a great feature now that I fear is likely to be taken out of the final version. It involves being able to place your own surveillance cameras at certain spots in the game and view them remotely. You have 4 extra screens, but that means 4 times the processing." Unfortunately, he was right. The cameras didn't make it in, and even adding reflective surfaces forced Kojima to reduce polygon counts for characters and environments. At the next year's E3, just a few months before launch, MGS2's trailer ended with a classic "one more thing." The spectacle of a flood ripping through the tanker as Snake sprinted to stay ahead of it. But when fans finally got their hands on the long-awaited sequel, that entire sequence was notably missing. Kojima later explained the cut. Hyper asked if he achieved 100% of what he wanted, and he told them, "I was not able to do even half of what I wanted to do. Since this is an action game, I had to avoid designing situations which would result in any slowdown due to the PS2's processing speed. The PS2 is not the magic box. There was an event in the game in which you would try to move yourself through a flood. We really tried to include it in the game, but it ended up being dropped." He cut the flood escape at the last minute, but it still made it in as a cutscene. When Olga reveals her backstory and motivations to Raiden, you can see it in a flashback. There was going to be another sequence on the tanker where Snake swims underwater surrounded by sharks, and Snake would have to spill his blood in the right places to distract them so he could escape before drowning. Kojima described several other sequences with sharks, including a boss battle against a great white, but in the end, not even one shark made it into the final game. A few months after launch, series artist Yoji Shinkawa published an MGS2 art book, which was promoted with a lengthy online interview. Talking about an unused Antarctic snake design, Shinkawa said it was going to be a penguin suit that lets Snake breathe underwater. But transforming it from a concept into an in-game item would have been extra work that wouldn't have been worth it. Presumably, it would have come in handy in all those underwater shark and flood sequences. In our last video, we talked about a few cut characters, like Old Boy and Chinaman. But we missed one shown in this art book, Ed from the NYPD Bomb Squad. According to Shinkawa, it's actually Ed Brown from Police Knots, a game he and Kojima made for 3DO. In Police Knots, Ed's part of the LAPD sometime around 2013, but later becomes chief of the Space Colony's Vice Unit. Meryl Silverberg got her start in Police Knots 2 as Ed's subordinate in the Vice Unit. So moving Ed into the Metal Gear universe would continue the tradition. MGS2 would have shown Ed Brown in his younger days, in the NYPD's bomb squad, but that'd mean him dying a few years before the events in Police Knots, possibly creating some sort of time paradox. So he got replaced with Peter Stillman. There were also a few scenes left out, mostly for being a little too weird. In the final game, there's a soldier who can't hold his bladder any longer and pees over a fence, not realizing that he's soaking Raiden. The Colonel and Rose call to express their sympathies and tell Raiden to take a shower when the mission's over. On a Japanese talk show, Kojima said he wanted to add another scene to go along with it. This time, a guard backs up to a fence with his butt out, making the player think, "Oh god, is this guy about to blow mud all over me?" But then, to their surprise, they just get peed on again. Kojima thought it was hilarious, but none of his developers would make it for him. They all pretended to be too busy. There was another scene he wanted to include right at the beginning, the first time Snake enters the tanker. As you walk down the corridor, you hear the suspense-building violin music from the movie Psycho. The violin sounds get louder and louder as you approach a door, making you think something terrifying is about to happen. When you open the door, bracing yourself for the worst, you find a guard playing the violin. It's just a gag, but it cost too much to buy a violin and do motion capture for it, so the scene didn't get made. On the game's 20th anniversary, Kojima tweeted out some memories of what it was like behind the scenes. In a codec call with Rose, Raiden reveals that he was raised as a child soldier and fought in Liberia's Civil War, and was shown Hollywood movies for image training. Kojima acquired real-life footage of a child soldier to use in the game, and edited it himself, but the footage was rejected by the ratings board and had to be cut. In another tweet, Kojima said there was one more sequence that pushed things a little too far and had to get dialed back. Right after Raiden reveals his dark childhood, he has to run through Arsenal gear naked. The whole time, he's been using his hands to hide his baby maker. But originally, if you fumbled in combat, then what should not be seen would be seen, and you'd immediately get a game over. But the biggest thing that almost got cut was not Raiden's penis. It was the entire game. In our last video, we talked about how large sections of the story were changed last minute because of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. The original plot began with weapons inspections in Iraq and ended with half of New York's financial district getting destroyed. But after 9/11 happened, MGS2 was deemed too close to reality, and the story was revised to avoid controversy. Shortly after our video was published, more details came to light, thanks to the translation work of the Kojima archivist. In 2005, the Snake Eater Extreme box set was released in Japan, which included a behind-the-scenes book called The Shedding. Several pages are dedicated to 9/11 from Kojima's perspective, and how instead of making revisions, he originally wanted to cancel the game completely. In September 2001, development was pretty much finished, and 2 million Americans had already placed pre-orders. Then a staff member came to Kojima and shouted that something had crashed into the World Trade Center. A chill ran down his spine. He ran to the TV room and saw the plot of his game playing out in real life. I felt I could no longer release this game. The Twin Towers are clearly visible throughout the game, even in the polygon demo scene. We treated it as an iconic building. This was no longer a good idea. An emergency meeting was held the next day with an American lawyer to advise them, and they feared releasing the game could provoke the terrorists to attack Konami, especially Kojima and his team. They were afraid of the US government too, as Japanese news reported that ordinary citizens who criticized the Bush administration were losing their jobs and getting physically attacked. Sons of Liberty's villain was the president himself, and the script called him a terrorist. In Hollywood, war movies and action films with controversial themes were getting canceled left and right. Kojima wanted to follow suit. I personally thought MGS2 should not have been released. I even intended to quit the company. It was only 2 or 3 years of hard work, but his team strongly disagreed and pushed back, and Konami's top brass had their back. Ultimately, all decisions regarding the American version were taken out of Kojima's hands, and hundreds of pieces were surgically removed. The game released in America 2 months after the attack, and to Kojima's surprise, he only got one complaint about ideology. It turned out most fans were actually pissed off that Raiden was the main character instead of Snake. That was the big controversy, which I kinda knew it would be at the time. Anyway, there were no terrorist or government attacks against Konami. Metal Gear Solid 2 went on to sell 7 million copies worldwide, and achieved critical acclaim as one of the most culturally influential games of all time. After Sons of Liberty's massive success, Kojima wanted to do something that had never been done before, a realistic jungle. So he took his staff into the wilderness for a few days so they could build the game from personal experience, which turned into a life-threatening experience when some of them got lost. They were trained in CQC by combat specialists who threw them around, knocked them to the ground, and chopped them with dummy knives. I think I was thrown around 30 times, one developer recalls. Another said they hit him so hard he almost broke his bones. The climax of their training was when the MGS3 team split into 3 groups to sleep for the night. The combat specialists surrounded each group in the darkness, threatened their guard with a knife, and took him hostage. Then mock executed every last developer. After their school of hard knocks, Kojima's team threw out the MGS2 engine and built a brand new one from the ground up, specifically made for wilderness environments. They initially planned to use a dynamic weather system, so even if you stood in one place, the weather would change over time. But the mechanic was eventually cut, so in the game's final build, every area has predetermined weather patterns. In a case of making things a little too realistic, Kojima originally wanted the sniper battle with the end to last longer than the entire rest of the game. He thought Sniper Wolf was too game-like, as she only appeared in a few spots and the duel was over quickly, so Kojima aimed to make Snake Eater's sniper duel more true to life. In a 2005 magazine commentary, he said, "I'm personally a fan of Stephen Hunter's novels, where you have scenes in the mountains where 2 snipers are hiding and trying to find each other for days. That's something I wanted to do in MGS3, so finally, I get these 2 characters in the mountains hiding, with the end trying to ambush Snake. When I explained what I wanted to do to my programmers, I made them read Hunter's books. We also went into the mountains and did some real training. My final direction to my guys was, if there are 10 people that play this boss fight, I wouldn't mind if 5 of them hated it to the point of wanting to stop playing, as long as the other 5 fall in love with it." Which I did, by the way. Kojima wanted it to take 1 or 2 weeks of sneaking and sniping to finish the fight. 2 weeks in real life. After Kojima's programmers finished building it, they sat down to test it out, but were playing for hours and hours and couldn't find the old man even once. The whole team hated it and started booing Kojima, who finally accepted his vision wasn't going to work. Then they changed it into a much easier and shorter affair, the boss battle we know today. Snake Eater has a variety of vehicle types, and mid-development, Kojima said players would probably get to operate at least some of them. Closer to release, Famitsu Weekly asked if Snake was going to be able to take control of aerial vehicles after he shot them down. Kojima said that was originally part of the plan, but realized it might break the game if Snake could fly everywhere, so they stopped working on that mechanic. In the game's final build, Snake can't operate any vehicles. There were a few ideas Kojima considered, but by the sounds of it, not as seriously as others. In that same Famitsu interview, Kojima said they thought about letting Snake take enemy weapons, which is pretty standard in first-person shooters, but decided not to because it'd make the game unbalanced. He also considered Snake using mud to cool himself to avoid heat detection, as well as jumping in rivers to make attack dogs lose his scent. Kojima said, "In films and novels, dogs lose track of who they're chasing when that person goes across a river. In reality, I've been told that this is not the case. At this point, I am still contemplating whether I want to make it realistic or keep the fictional flavor." The mechanic didn't make it in, so apparently, he chose to side with reality. The MGS 1 through 4 art book shows a few unpublished characters who appear to have gotten cut too early to be named, so they only got numbers, like the Medusa-themed number 2, the tiny-handed number 3, and number 7 and 8, who look like they'd be more at home in Silent Hill than Metal Gear. The book also shows some early sketches of characters who did make it into the game, like a pre-wheelchair eye patch wearing the End. There's also a middle-aged version of the Fear, who the book notes has some African blood. Probably the weirdest concepts are for the Pain, with one wearing a gimp mask and another simply labeled Black Man style. Then there's the boss, who's got a tattoo of a snake on her chest. According to Kojima, she was a mentor, a lover, and much like a mother to Snake. They had a very complicated connection, but I knew that I would have to emphasize the maternal aspect more than anything. So when designing the boss, I imagined a mother with one breast out feeding her child, a kind of mother-son nuance. So even with her breast exposed, she would enter battle. When I first designed her, in the area around her chest, she had a tattoo of a snake, so when firing a gun, her breast would shake, making the snake look like it was laughing. There would be this legend that when you saw the laughing snake, your life would soon be over. But the tattoo and its backstory ultimately got cut and replaced with a snake-shaped scar from a cesarean section she had while giving birth in World War II. The climactic ending with Snake and the boss was revised as well. It seems this was a pretty late change, as the English voiceovers were already recorded. In the final game, these are her last words.
"There's only room for one boss and one snake."
But unused audio on the disc reveals it was originally going to play out a little differently, seemingly with the player in full control, able to move and aim at will, as the boss begs Snake to end her life.
"Shoot me. Come on. Shoot me. What are you waiting for? Just do it. Shoot me. What are you aiming at? I'm here. No. Shoot me. Do it right. What are you doing? Get it right this time.
Ultimately, the player's freedom and all that begging got cut, and the player only has control over the trigger. After Snake Eater's development was almost wrapped up, a few changes were made between the Japanese and English versions. It was the first game in the series to drop an F-bomb, but only in Japan. It happens when Volgan calls Eva, his precious little pet, then she hits him with a big FU. Here's the Japanese version.
なんだ言いたいことでもあるのか
And here's the toned-down English version.
Do you have something to say to me?
Go to hell!
Later games weren't so shy about dropping F-bombs, but things were different back in the early 2000s. Post-release, a couple dozen new camo designs were made available for download. Most of them were eventually added into Subsistence and the HD edition, but 4 camos were only available in Japan, like the E/Den camo, designed by manga artist Takayuki Mizushina to make Snake look like a hippie. Also the New Year's camo, with a rising sun representing the Japanese concept of a New Year's beginning, and the Yodobashi camo, based on the Japanese retailer Yodobashi Camera Company. They were all included on a 2006 bonus disc distributed by the Japanese magazine Dengeki PS2. But the most difficult to obtain was the Wonder Goo camo. You had to go to a Japanese Wonder Goo store where they had a machine that uploaded the camo onto your PS2 memory card. None of these 4 camos were ever made available outside Japan. A year after Snake Eater, MGS3 Subsistence released and came with a new PvP mode called Metal Gear Online. Kojima originally wanted to include some girls from Dead or Alive as unlockable characters, but the producer of the wrestling series Rumble Roses asked if they could collaborate someday. Kojima would have preferred girls from Dead or Alive, but Rumble Roses was also owned by Konami, and he felt kind of obligated, so he added a couple Rumble Roses girls instead. If not for that, Metal Gear Online might have looked something like this. But arguably, the biggest piece of content was cut in 2012, when Snake Eater got a 3DS remake. It added a few new features like the camouflage photography system that let you take pictures in real life and turn them into custom camos. But in 2017, a data miner called Pliskin Hunter stumbled over an entire mode cut in development, Extra Ops. Peace Walker released a couple of years earlier and released 128 extra ops that were essentially VR missions, with objectives like eliminating every soldier in a given area, rescuing hostages, and getting from point A to point B with perfect stealth. Each mission only took a few minutes, but at the end, you got a ranking based on your performance, so there's a lot of replayability if you wanted to chase S ranks. What Pliskin Hunter discovered was 69 brand new extra ops that were intended for Snake Eater 3D. Yeah, 69. A fitting name for a game called Snake Eater. We got in touch with Pliskin Hunter, who was kind enough to share some info and rehack his game to get this footage. There were 4 ingredient capture operations, 4 animal captures, 4 eliminate enemy soldiers, 4 eliminate enemy in the time limit, 4 one-shots, 5 pantry demolitions, 4 armory demolitions, 5 perfect stealths, 5 true perfect stealths, 4 holdups, 5 claymore disarmaments, and 5 attack chopper battles. There were also 16 boss extensions, 2 each for Ocelot, the Pain, the Fear, the End, the Fury, Volgan, the Shagohod, and of course, the boss. With hacking, a lot of these extra ops are fully playable, but they're clearly unfinished. For example, there's no proper menu system, and when you complete a mission, you're immediately booted out with no fanfare. And instead of a ranking, there's just a placeholder that says Result Test. If Extra Ops mode was finished, it would have added quite a few hours of extra content and done even more to make Snake Eater 3D the definitive MGS3 experience.
Snake! What happened? Snake! Snake!
Portable Ops follows Big Boss 6 years after the events of Snake Eater, but the game was initially conceived with a completely different premise. We recently spoke with Ryan Payton, who worked on the game. and he told us the original idea was a PSP game that let you relive the series' history through a gauntlet of boss battles. The game would have run on the Subsistence engine and focused on local and online multiplayer. He said those initial ideas probably only survived for a month or two in terms of it being more boss-focused. This is just my interpretation of what was going on in those early days, which was, how do we create an authentic Metal Gear experience for PlayStation Portable that satisfies fans, perhaps more than the Acid series up to that point? And also, how do we get that game out the door fairly quickly? So the idea was to dust off existing boss battles and add some co-op elements to it as well. But those ideas didn't last very long, because we quickly pivoted towards what ended up becoming Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops. After they changed the game's structure, Portable Ops was developed in just a single year, so there wasn't much time to ruminate on huge ideas. Also, Kojima wasn't as closely involved in the project, so compared to the rest of the series, there wasn't the deep well of ambitious concepts for us to detail here. But there were a few interesting regional differences. Portable Ops had a feature that required a GPS peripheral. The game told you to go to specific real-life coordinates, and there you'd be rewarded with special soldiers. Ryan told us how Kojima likes to make use of every feature offered by a console, and this geocaching mechanic was right up his alley. Unfortunately, the GPS was only released in Japan, so Western fans never had access to the feature. There were also 8 soldier types you could only unlock by visiting Japanese stores like Wonder Goo, who'd worked out a promotional agreement with Konami. Metal Gear games usually released in Europe a few months after the US and Japan, so sometimes Konami gave them extra content to make up for it. For Portable Ops, European versions got a new boss rush mode, 2 more multiplayer maps, additional soldier types and careers, and 5 extra spy reports. So not only did America get less content than their friends across both oceans, but because of all the regional differences, nobody got the full experience. And with so many of those online features and promotions no longer in service, a big chunk of Portable Ops is completely inaccessible, and much of the game is essentially lost to time.
What are you wearing?
What do you mean?
Why are you here?
Oh, well, I was hoping to promote my new movie. I'm just coming off of the set.
No, David Hayter. Why here, wearing an eye patch?
For the franchise's big finale, Kojima dreamt even bigger than he had before, and his early vision was completely different from the game that hit store shelves 3 years later. He said other PlayStation 3 games were just evolving the graphics, not the gameplay. Kojima wanted the next generation to push 3D into 4D, with a realistically recreated ecosystem. Every tree would grow from a seed, shed its leaves, and then die. There should be life in that tree. If we water the tree, it will grow. If we burn the tree, it will die. I want to create this kind of simulation world. He laid out his vision for Metal Gear Solid 4 in a lengthy interview in EGM. I would like to create something that we hadn't seen before. Up to today, creating games was almost like creating a set for the movies. You have the set in a studio, but a set is a set. There's nothing behind that, it's hollow. And also, everything is completely fake. It looks pretty, it looks like the real thing, but it actually isn't. Some creators might think, how can I expand my set and make it bigger? How can I make it a bigger world is what a typical creator would think. Even if you do that though, I think that's not meaningful because a set is a set. The trees are still plastic. Everything is still a fake. Although you try to enhance the look of the jungle, everything is a fake. I would like to go after the real. I would have the trees with life inside. So if you water the tree, it will grow. If you don't water the tree, it might die. Then I would ask the users, why not play hide and seek in that real jungle? A core theme he brought up again and again was creating what can't be seen. In short, while other studios were improving their games with next-gen graphics, Kojima was evolving the gameplay by focusing on the invisible. But those ambitious goals bear little resemblance to what MGS4 ultimately became. Looking back after release, G4 asked Kojima if his original vision was different to the final product. He said, there were differences from the beginning, when we started in the concept stage to the final product. But in the midst of development, when we saw the actual PS3 and its limits and things like that, we changed our vision and goals. At the beginning, we only heard rumors about the machine, that we could do anything on it, that it was a monster machine, and so we set our dreams too high because we believed it could do anything. But when we saw the actual machine, of course, there are a lot of limits to it, and there were things we could do and could not do. It wasn't about the PS3's power, it was us dreaming too big. A couple more examples he described from that unrealized ecosystem was if you burn something, the chemicals affect other parts of the environment. Or if water spilled on the grass, at some point a flower would bloom in that exact spot. Another core concept was Snake playing 3 nations against each other. We covered that concept pretty in depth in our last video, so just to sum it up, Kojima said you could ally with countries A, B, or C, or go lone wolf. If two countries in a particular area were fighting each other, you could support one against the other to wipe them out, so only friendlies were left in the vicinity. Or you could just wait until both sides wiped each other out for sort of an easy mode. Play your cards wrong, and you'll have both of them against you. Hard mode. If one army gets destroyed, maybe they're missing from a later area they would have otherwise occupied. Whose side you were on was constantly changing based on your own decisions, which would have made the game highly replayable. Kojima also said the maps would be huge, the size of Grand Theft Auto environments, and full of all kinds of nooks and crannies, but they'd be much more fleshed out. He pointed to the houses in GTA, saying they're empty and lifeless, but in the new generation of Metal Gear, people actually lived in these houses. They had a life. Civilians and bystanders, he hinted, might even take up arms to protect their families. Another feature, touted as early as the very first trailer, was no place to hide. Kojima said they wanted to make most of the game world destructible, and in some areas pretty much anything could be destroyed. But in the final game, destruction was minimal and mostly pre-scripted. However, only shadows of those ideas made it into the final product. Kojima blamed the PS3's lack of power, and also said he regretted getting distracted with his management duties in the newly formed Kojima Productions, which at the time was developing Acid 2, Portable Ops Plus, Metal Gear Online, and 2 digital graphic novels. He told Edge magazine he wanted MGS4 to take 10 steps forward, but to his disappointment, it only managed to take 1 step forward. The moment-to-moment gameplay wasn't up to Kojima's standards either, but that was a matter of development talent rather than hardware restrictions. Just before MGS4 hit store shelves, he said, "I thought Assassin's Creed was brilliant because it really fulfilled the basic concept that MGS4 had at the beginning, how you could go anywhere in the environment and also you could climb anywhere, run anywhere." At the beginning of the concept, Metal Gear Solid 4 had motion blending, meaning if you push down a direction, things go automatically and seamlessly. If a bullet comes, you don't have to manually dodge, but the motion dodges and happens naturally. We kind of gave up on this because it was just too difficult, but when Assassin's Creed came out, we saw that they accomplished what we were really aiming for at first. I have to tell you that my staff and I were really low for the next 3 days after it came out. Assassin's Creed was Kojima's favorite game there for a while, so much so that he eventually added Altair's cloak into Guns of the Patriots as a DLC. Those were the big ideas, but a few small ones got cut as well, like PS3 to PSP connectivity. At E3 2005, Kojima told interviewers that MGS4 would connect with Acid 2 in some way. He later said he wanted to connect with Portable Ops to trade soldiers between games, and was also considering letting players, maybe even a second player, control the Mark II with a PSP. Kojima tried to implement drivable vehicles in the previous game, and he was even more enthusiastic for them in Guns of the Patriots. He was a big fan of Halo 2, and pointed out that in all the popular games, players can drive pretty much anything, and yes, they were going to try and let Snake do the same in MGS4. None of those ideas made it in either. After release, Kojima told a Chinese magazine that they originally planned to include 108 weapons, but only ended up with around 70. 108's a very specific number, especially since Kojima didn't seem to remember the exact number that actually made it in. 108's also a culturally significant number, which might have been why it was the initial goal. At year's end in Japan, a bell's rung 108 times in Buddhist temples to close out the year and open the page on a new chapter. Each ring represents one of 108 earthly temptations a person has to overcome to achieve nirvana. And thus, the 108 weapons represent Snake's battlefield temptations, juxtaposed against the game's final message, to put aside the gun and live.
Nice argument, Senator. Why don't you back it up with a source?
My source is that I made it the f*** up.
Okay, yes, I am speculating on the meaning, but Kojima did say they originally wanted Snake to have 108 weapons. In another interview, Kojima also said he was considering letting players trade weapon customizations with each other online, but that didn't make it in either. Another, more bizarre idea, which was probably never going to happen, was Kojima's desire to incorporate smell and even taste into his games. Before the 6-axis controller was revealed to the public, he told PSM Russia, "If the PS3 comes with a controller that allows you to smell or taste things, that would be wonderful. I am interested in what new experience I can give to the user through all this." The problem is that most games limit you to using the TV and the console's joystick. Personally, I think this is a fundamentally flawed practice. Everything that surrounds the player in one way or another, his whole room even, should be involved in the process. He'd actually been talking about the idea as far back as MGS1, but even if he couldn't incorporate smell, he did make the player's room part of the game, like switching the controller port in the fight against Psycho Mantis, and using the back of the real-life CD case to find a codec frequency. In fact, smell had been on Kojima's mind even before the first Metal Gear. In his 1988 game Snatcher, he wanted to coat the disc with blood-scented paint, so when the console got hot, it would melt and players could smell the murder scene. But up till now, at least, he'd never been able to realize his decades-long dream of a smellable game. And of course, it wouldn't be Metal Gear without a little censorship. When asked if Snake's injections were a gameplay mechanic, Kojima said no. It has a little bit of friction against first-party Sony rules. At first, I had plans to have this injection as a player's item, but with the ratings, and even team members questioning that direction, we decided not to do that. Apparently, Sony wouldn't tolerate performance-enhancing injections as a playable item, so they were downgraded to a plot device. At a signing event, Kojima revealed that the Beauty and the Beast cores were originally going to appear buck naked, and Yoji Shinkawa mentioned that in preparation, they had the actresses do motion capture in the nude, but they couldn't use it in the final game. There was also a subplot in the Naomi tracking sequence where enemy soldiers left a trail of women's clothes, leading you in the wrong direction. At the end of the trail, you'd eventually find a naked female soldier, but that got cut as well. When we talked to Ryan Payton, he described a cut sequence intended to fit between the Big Mama motorcycle chase and running into Liquid. He said, "There were some things that definitely fell on the cutting room floor, including a sequence in Eastern Europe. There was an underground tunnel sequence that players would go through with Big Mama as a kind of an escort scenario. That was cut fairly late in the process, so I always thought if there was ever a Metal Gear Solid 4 Substance version, maybe the team would dust that off. It was probably 60 or 65% complete, and part of the reason it got cut was because it was behind schedule. You were escorting Big Mama in a callback to MGS3 when you were helping Eva, who was injured after a big motorcycle sequence. So here you were helping an injured Big Mama go through the underground after this big epic motorcycle chase as a callback. You can see the cut in real time when Snake and Big Mama crawl down a manhole into a tunnel, walk about 50 feet, and then turn right and they're already outside. The tunnel was originally a lot longer, and that's where the sequence took place. By the way, I'm David Hayter, the guy narrating this video. Some of you may not know, I was Snake's voice actor. We actually recorded about 4 minutes of dialogue for that sequence. Here's a few small pieces.
Otacon, this place is crawling with rats.
What, you were expecting a more vermin-free underground waterway?
Something's weird about the way they're moving. First the birds helped me out in South America. Now it's the rats' turn.
You've got to inject Big Mama with the nanomachine suppressant. Snake, what are you killing rats for? Torturing small animals is a sign of a warped mind, you know? Leave them alone and get back to helping Big Mama, all right?
Ryan also told us that there were some ideas the staff had to cut due to time constraints, and as they were cutting them, the developers were saying, well, maybe this could get brought back in an eventual MGS4 Substance version, like the tunnel sequence. And Ryan also talked about fleshing out moments that happen off-screen, like what the Rat Patrol was doing behind the scenes in the Middle East. But after development was finished, the team shifted hard into Peace Walker and developing the Fox engine, so that definitive edition never got made. If it was up to Kojima, Raiden's hack-and-slash spin-off wouldn't have starred Raiden at all. I wanted to go for Frank Yeager or Gray Fox, but if we had gone with that, I would have had to write the script and then be really committed to creating the game. I want to pass game development to the younger generation in my team, and have been trying to do so for quite some time. They wanted to come up with a really cool hack-and-slash title with some katana action and Raiden in it, and I thought, okay, that's fine, I respect that. A month after launch, Konami released a DLC pack made up of 30 new VR missions, but the Japanese version of the DLC gave fans something other regions didn't get. A wooden sword called Hebi Damashi, which means Snake Soul. Canonically, it was forged through the latest advancements in spiritual technology in order to pass on the wisdom of the legendary Solid Snake to future generations. Snake's Japanese voice actor, Akio Otsuka, recorded a new voiceover for it. And the sword talks to Raiden as he fights with it. If it had been localized into English, I guess it would have sounded something like this. Cardboard, huh? You get it, don't you, Raiden? It must be used with care. Devotion. You need to love the cardboard box. You can't just handle it roughly. No man who loves cardboard can be bad. This isn't training. This is life or death. There are no heroes out here. If you lose, you die for nothing. That sword was the only part of the DLC that didn't release outside Japan, and other than Snake's voice, it was functionally identical to the standard wooden sword available worldwide. So it seems the voice was probably the reason it didn't get localized, since it was only a few months before Ground Zeroes. I don't know for certain, but I can't tell you for a fact that I didn't record voiceover for it. And I don't remember ever being asked to either. It's been like 10 years though, so it's possible my memory is a little fuzzy. Y'all know I do stuff besides just voice Snake, right? I can go buy Wolves on DVD. As far as Rising, though, I guess you could say an entire game got cut. Metal Gear Solid Rising was scrapped almost entirely when Platinum Games took over and transformed it into Metal Gear Rising Revengeance. But did you know Gaming will be covering Rising at some point, including some new information never made public? So we'll leave that topic for another time, and move on to the final game discussed in today's video. Yeah, let's not do this one, actually. 5's already been done to death. Hey guys, let's do the wild geese thing. Yeah, I know we said we weren't going to do that one. Let's do it anyway. Okay, cool. In 1978, a movie you've probably never heard of, The Wild Geese, released in theaters. Some mercenaries are hired to infiltrate a military base in Zimbabwe, Africa, and extract a political hostage so he can be exchanged for access to Zimbabwean copper mines. The mercs are hired by a merchant banker, Sir Edward Matheson, who's sort of the movie's big boss. They halo jump into Zimbabwe, but they're vastly outnumbered, so they have to use stealth to silently kill the enemy soldiers. The mission's successful, but just as the mercenaries are about to make their escape, the big boss betrays them and is revealed to be the real villain. Their plane flies off without them, leaving the mercs totally screwed in the middle of nowhere. Hideo Kojima loves this movie, and the story appears to have inspired some elements of the Metal Gear franchise. The original 1987 Metal Gear was initially conceived as a game about a prisoner of war trying to escape, but during development, transformed into a game about Special Forces infiltration. In a series of tweets in 2011, Kojima revealed that at that point in time, he wanted to make Metal Gear into a team infiltration game, just like the Wild Geese. But the MSX wasn't capable of making Kojima's idea into reality, so he had no choice but to make Metal Gear a one-man against the world affair instead. If the MSX was a little more powerful, or if Metal Gear was made for different hardware, it would have been a completely different kind of game, and consequently, the entire series would have been different. For the past 35 years, underpowered hardwares prevented Kojima from making Metal Gear games he dreamed of making. But from the very beginning, we have underpowered hardware to thank for giving us the Metal Gear franchise as we know it today. Did you know Hideo Kojima wanted to let players keep rats as pets in Metal Gear Solid? Rats play a small but significant role in the game's final build, like following them through air ducts and finding one that ate a key. But, according to Kojima, he originally wanted them to play an even bigger role. He said the rats were a way of adding reality to the game, and to create the atmosphere within the base. The enemy soldiers eat food and they have leftovers, which attracts the rats. I actually wanted to put more rats in. Another thing I wanted to do was reassign names to individual rats, and these rats could then be raised as pets. Alaska is a very cold place, and when Snake first goes into the base, the rats are the first life forms he encounters. So I think they're a very important element in the game. When Snake returns to Shadow Moses 9 years later in Metal Gear Solid 4, there's an optional codec conversation where Snake refers to the rats as his friends, which leaves Otacon thoroughly confused. Ostensibly, Snake says they're his friends because they helped him through the vents 9 years earlier, but it may also have been a nod to the fact that Snake was originally meant to keep them as pets. There was also a rat-based Easter egg in the shootout with Sniper Wolf. According to Kojima, in that scene initially I had this little cheat in there where if you kept shooting the rats, you'd get bigger and bigger rats. It was in there for a while, but then I felt like it was too much of a joke, so I took it out. But in the final game, instead of the rats growing, there's a secret where Colonel Campbell calls and tells you to stop shooting them and get back to the mission. And if you ignore his orders, Naomi calls and says you must be pretty sick to torture small animals. Kojima also said his favorite scene is the Jeep escape, although it was originally planned to be a bit different and would let players choose between the driver's seat and the gun on the back. It didn't work out though, so in the game's final build, Snake only shoots. All three of these stories come from a 4-page interview published in the May 1999 issue of Computer and Video Games magazine. These are just a few examples of cut content from the series, but Kojima once said he could only get about 60% of his ideas in Metal Gear Solid, and had to abandon lots more throughout the entire series. So, to learn about them all, Did You Know Gaming dug through about 800 retro magazines looking for interviews, sifted through various documents, and conducted a few exclusive interviews with developers. So sit back, grab some rations, and check out the strangest and most ambitious ideas that never made it into the Metal Gear series. One cut idea was a singing mariachi who advised Snake on battle tactics. mechanics. In the May '99 issue of official UK PlayStation magazine, an interviewer asked Kojima about cut content and he told them, "There was another character, Mariachi. He was an analyst and every time you fight you were supposed to talk to this guy and he'd tell you the best way to defeat your enemy. And every time you asked for this guy, he sang a song. The song was in Spanish, like with a flamenco guitar. It was ridiculous." And he laughed. And a year later, he told Edge magazine, he knew a lot about mercenaries and you could contact him through the codec. He'd give you information about a particular mercenary, but only after he sang a song, and you'd have to sit through the entire song before he'd give the information. He didn't make it into the game. When Snake lands on Shadow Moses, he only has 2 items in his possession, a scope and a pack of cigarettes. Snake's cigarettes were somewhat controversial, but Konami was cool with it because smoking drains your health, which let players know smoking's bad for you. The game also features a lung cancer warning, although Snake brushes it off because cigarettes taste good. But besides looking cool, smoking only comes in useful once in the entire game, letting you blow smoke on invisible lasers so you can sneak past them. However, in the very first issue of Arcade magazine, Kojima explained that he actually wanted to add more incentives for Snake to light up, saying, "We were planning to include more of the cigarettes in the gameplay. For example, at one point you would be stuck in a cell with no way out. The trick would be to befriend the guard by giving him a cigarette, but this idea didn't make it into the final game." When the series made the jump to PlayStation 2, despite the upgrade in hardware, Kojima said his unlimited desire to create still surpassed what the PS2 was capable of, and some ideas had to be thrown out. One of the more interesting mechanics was real-time whisker shaving, where your facial hair would grow based on the PS2's internal clock, and you could choose between shaving or letting it grow out naturally. But real-time facial hair ultimately got cut and replaced with a couple Easter eggs instead. In the final build, the shaver's pretty useless, and it's easy to miss and finish the game without it. But if you manage to find the shaver early on, Raiden gives it to Snake in the cutscene when they first meet. Snake usually has whiskers when you see him later, but he'll appear clean-shaven if you gave him the shaver, and his whiskers will actually grow back 1 week later, as tracked by the PS2's internal clock, which is reflected in codec calls as well as his in-game model. During Metal Gear Solid 4's development, Kojima said he'd try to bring back real-time whisker shaving, but in the end, the mechanic never found its way into the series at all. Kojima is famous for playing mind tricks on his fans, but one of those tricks got removed from MGS2 because even the developers were getting confused. According to Kojima, the original cell phone only vibrated and didn't ring. "I wanted to fool the player by making him think he was incurring damage when actually all that was happening was that the phone was ringing. But then, so many of our staff who didn't know about the cell phone making the controller vibrate thought the vibration was a bug. That's why we added a ringing sound." In all the international versions, the ringtone sounds like this. But the Japanese version got an exclusive MGS theme chiptune ringtone. The FAMAS assault rifle was iconic in the original Metal Gear Solid, but its inclusion kinda didn't make sense, since it's a type of gun almost exclusively used by French soldiers and not American special forces, or Russians either for that matter. The FAMAS was originally planned for the sequel as well, and Snake can be seen with it in early trailers, but Kojima was pressured to remove it for realism purposes. In an interview with EGM, he said, "The game was first developed with the FAMAS, but we turned it into the M4 to be consistent with the story. Graphics supervisor Yoji Shinkawa and others who know a lot about guns begged us to drop the FAMAS. We had to drop all the polygon models and character motions involving the FAMAS as a result. What a waste." Fortunately, it wasn't a complete waste. Since it was cut so late in development, the FAMAS can still be found in MGS2's Trial Edition, a demo bundled with Zone of the Enders, also produced by Kojima. With a cheat code, you can still unlock it and use it throughout the entire demo. In that same interview, Kojima goes on to say that there were at least 4 more items scrapped in MGS2's development, like the SPP-1M underwater pistol, a real-life gun developed by the Soviet Union in the 1960s, which held 4 bullets and had an effective range of about 50 feet firing underwater. Data for this underwater pistol can still be found in an early demo of the Trial Edition. You can actually use the SPP-1M with hacks, but the gun was never rendered, so it's invisible. Kojima also said X-ray goggles were cut, which presumably would have let you see through enemies in walls. There was also the decoy balloon, which eventually made its way into Metal Gear Solid 5. Kojima also mentioned a penguin suit, which actually had some concept art made public, with a Japanese caption that says, "Antarctic Snake." The way it's written, it's clearly a reference to Antarctic Adventure, a 1983 game made by Konami, where you race a penguin to far-flung research stations all around Antarctica. Its sequel, Penguin Adventure, released 3 years later and was the first game Kojima ever worked on. Penguin suit concept art was included in the Document of Metal Gear Solid 2, an interactive making-of documentary released a year after the game itself. The document also includes these experimental 3D models for Snake and Mei Ling, along with 4 characters who got cut out entirely, like Chinaman, a boss who, despite being Vietnamese, brags that he's, quote, more Chinese than the Chinese. He was sold as a child to a New Yorker, then grew up getting discriminated against, so he seeks revenge on New York and America in general. According to Kojima, Chinaman would have had a dragon tattoo that came to life when he dove into water, and part of the boss battle would have taken place underwater, with Chinaman sending sharks after you. He ended up getting cut when Kojima's team ran out of time, although he later appeared in the official MGS2 comic book adaptation, along with another cut character named Old Boy. Old Boy's over 100 years old and fought for the Germans in World War II, and taught Big Boss everything he knows about the art of combat. Piranhas and boss battles against the President's security team and great white sharks were also mentioned in the document, but didn't appear in the final game. And a couple more cut characters who weren't quite as fleshed out. A girl named Max, who saved your game and loved to quote William Shakespeare, and Doc, a scientist who developed Arsenal Gear's AI and provided radio support. Both would eventually be exposed as AI constructs, just like the Colonel. But the most interesting part of the document is Kojima's original vision for MGS2, which he called the Grand Game Plan. About 90% of the plan made it into the final game, but the remaining 10% got scrapped. It features some interesting unused ideas, like that Kojima originally wanted to call it Metal Gear Solid 3, which would symbolize the 3 tallest skyscrapers in New York City and stir up buzz as fans would wonder what happened to Metal Gear Solid 2. The document also boasts of doing something that's never been done in a video game before: real-time split-screen cutscenes, where half the screen shows a cinematic while the player continues playing the game on the other half. The Grand Game Plan says there would have been 3 of them: the bomb disposal sequence with Raiden, Snake, and Peter Stillman, the sniper sequence surrounding Emma's rescue, and dismantling the C4 in the underwater strut. After examining titles that succeeded in America, Kojima said it was essential they include a multiplayer mode, where 2 players could either gun each other down or engage in a stealth-driven game of hide-and-seek. There was also going to be a Mantis mode for repeat playthroughs of the main campaign. By wearing the Mantis mask, you could hear the inner thoughts of NPCs to tell when they were lying, and better understand the game's complicated plot. There's also a scrapped location that was going to be at the bottom of the offshore plant surrounded by glass walls, and players could casually observe marine life, virtually explore the ocean floor with a remote-controlled mini-sub, and take pictures of what they saw. But this had no bearing on anything else in the game. Possibly the biggest change was Kojima's vision for MGS2's beginning and ending. The document explains in great detail how the first act begins with Iraq being suspected of developing their own Metal Gear, which prompts the United Nations to demand access for nuclear inspections. But Iraq refuses, so the US responds by threatening airstrikes. The final act would have seen a battle on Wall Street and half the financial district destroyed. But all of these plot points started to sound a bit too similar to what was happening in the real world during the game's development, particularly the 9/11 attacks, so the story was changed to avoid controversy. Not long after MGS2 hit store shelves, Kojima and his mentor Shigeru Miyamoto decided to bring the series to GameCube. Kojima's team was too busy to do it themselves, so they pitched it to Silicon Knights president Dennis Dyack. Silicon Knights had just finished Eternal Darkness, a critically acclaimed psychological horror published by Nintendo. Together, the 3 of them set out to remake the original Metal Gear Solid, beefed up with enhancements introduced in the sequel. In 2004, it released as Metal Gear Solid: The Twin Snakes. Mid-development, the game was announced to have a GameCube to GBA connectivity, but none of those features made it into the final game. When asked about it later, Dyack said, "We had some really interesting concepts and some co-op mode play ideas. For example, you could have a special radar on the GBA. You could have some kind of spy camera that you could, say, drop down and monitor a certain area for guards. There were all kinds of things we talked about, but at the end of the day, we just looked at the amount of resources and time it would take, and unfortunately, we just couldn't do it." Unable to find any more details in old magazines, now almost 20 years later, Did You Know Gaming tracked down Dennis Dyack to ask how those features might have worked. Dyack said they were tinkering with the idea of giving Snake a camera that you could leave in a room or drive around on wheels, and monitor the video feed on GBA. As far as co-op, the second player's primary purpose would have been aiding Snake indirectly, kinda like how Tingle did in The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker, providing stuff like items and info. That's about all he remembered. So, Did You Know Gaming decided to get in contact with Twin Snake's project leader, Carrie Murray. He said they also wanted to give players the option of having codec calls and the map on GBA. It could have saved players from fumbling in menus and stopping and starting so much. But Silicon Knights just didn't have enough time or manpower to implement it before release date. Murray's team had a lot of ideas they would have liked to have added in, but the budget and deadline were set. And because there were three major stakeholders, Konami, Nintendo, and Silicon Knights, no single entity had the authority to call for a delay or allocate more funds. They had exactly the amount of resources required for the job they were given, remaking MGS1 with the features of MGS2. But everyone involved, including Kojima and Miyamoto, did have a few more ideas they would have loved to have squeezed in. Eternal Darkness's main draw was its sanity effects, like tricking the player into thinking their TV was on the fritz, or that they got duped into buying a demo and not the full game. One of the team's main priorities was giving some of these abilities to Psycho Mantis, but they just didn't have the resources. Did You Know Gaming asked if there'd ever been any intention to add VR missions into Twin Snakes, and Murray said, "I think there was some talk about VR missions. That probably would have come first, before GBA connectivity, but VR was a lower priority as well. I think the way that worked was, well, let's see if we have any bandwidth towards the end and we can hook that up later. And we might have even started working on VR, but we didn't have time for that either, so we had to ship the game without the feature." He also said they wanted to add a split-screen mode where a second player took the role of a boss. The example he gave was Sniper Wolf, and they'd duke it out with Snake, like the Versus mode Kojima wanted in MGS2. But multiplayer would have required even more resources than their other ideas, so ultimately, they had no choice but to give up on that one as well. Now, let's move on to Metal Gear Solid 3. The first game was on PS1, the second on PS2, and Kojima originally wanted to develop the third for PS3. He waited and waited for Sony to release their next-generation console, but it took so long that he couldn't wait any longer and eventually settled for PlayStation 2. In the end, he said there were hundreds of ideas he couldn't fit into the game, many of them because there just wasn't enough space. A PS3 dual-layer Blu-ray holds 50 gigabytes, but a PS2 single-layer disc can't even hold 5 gigs, and the lack of storage meant Kojima had to make some cuts. He said, "We overflowed the confines of a DVD and had to cut tons of stuff in order to squeeze it onto the disc. We had to get rid of a few cutscenes simply because there wasn't room. We also had to get rid of several radio stations, codec frequencies dedicated to music. Some of these secret stations are still in the game, but we had to cut a lot of the tunes that we'd recorded for them. One of the few stations to survive in the final game was Healing Radio, a frequency that plays pleasant tunes that replenish your stamina. We wanted to make a station that would be the reverse of this, tunes so bad that they lower your stamina. We planned to sing the songs ourselves, but that never happened. We were just going to take turns butchering the Snake Eater opening theme karaoke style, but we simply didn't have room." Several other ideas ended up getting cut, like two bosses Kojima described as a lizard man and a moss guy. He even said they wanted to implement functionality with the PS2 Eye toy. Kojima never specified, but the Eye toy might have been meant for making custom camouflage. When the game was ported to the Nintendo 3DS 8 years later, they added the camouflage photography system, which let you take pictures of stuff in the real world and turn them into Snake's camo. But his team wasn't just short on space, they were also running short on time, and just barely managed to release the game 1 week before Black Friday, the state's biggest shopping day of the year. Unlike the previous two games, Metal Gear 3 didn't have a soliton radar to track your enemies, because the tech didn't exist back in the 60s. If he'd had more time, Kojima said he would have liked to design another game mode that did have a radar, but without making the game too easy. Some interesting camouflage mechanics also got scrapped, like being able to paint Snake's face manually any way you like, but they couldn't get the controls to feel natural and replaced the mechanic with preset templates. During development, Kojima also said they'd made over 100 camo patterns, but only half of them made it onto the final game. One he talked about on several occasions was the bloody camo, which was covered in blood and fake wounds, so if you lied next to some dead bodies, enemy soldiers would think Snake was dead too and leave him alone. This camo got cut from Metal Gear 3, but was brought back as the corpse camo in the next game. We don't want to dwell too long on Portable Ops, because despite having Solid in its title, it wasn't directed by Kojima himself, and he said it wasn't entirely part of the core series canon. But Kojima did mention one interesting idea in early 2006, while Portable Ops and Metal Gear Solid 4 were both still in development. In an interview with EGM, he said he wanted to let players move their teams back and forth between Portable Ops and MGS4's online mode, but he seems to indicate the gap in release dates was going to make it difficult to implement the level of connectivity between games. It's not entirely clear how that would have worked. But that might be because Metal Gear Solid 4's premise changed pretty dramatically during development. And in that sense, you could argue MGS4 has more scrapped ideas than any other game in the series. In early 2006, Kojima explained the MGS4's premise to EGM. Here, he said how the player could take several different approaches to completing missions that would have a deep impact on the game's story. If players chose to team up with Country C and went into battle where Countries A and B were fighting, they might prefer to sneak in, then flee unnoticed. But if the player got spotted by Country A or B, you'll have to fight them, or both countries if they spot you. You could even team up with a country if what you needed was in their territory, but that would mean becoming their ally and by default, the enemy of another country. Or you could just wait until the war's over and grab what you need after. Or you could destroy a country's forces in the current mission, and with no army, the conflict would simply not exist in the next. In Kojima's words, so, the new thing is that Snake will definitely have to go to the battlefield, and he will have the opportunity to interfere with the war, and that interference will affect the next stages. This is the new plot. Later that year, he told official PlayStation Magazine, "You may decide to stick with Nation A or B in the game's war, or you could destroy both. You could also choose not to ally with either country." In the game's final build, Snake could help out the rebels and engage in a little trading, but he could never ally with the PMCs, and the overall premise of playing off countries A, B, and C was left almost entirely on the cutting room floor. Kojima also wanted civilians to play a larger role on the battlefield, maybe taking up arms to protect their families, but that idea got scrapped as well. It seems MGS4 was originally planned as an entirely different kind of game, and lost some of its bigger ideas during its lengthy development. Even the ending turned out different. At TGS 2007, Kojima said, "One of my ideas for MGS4's ending was that since Snake and Otacon are breaking the law in order to fulfill their justice, I was thinking of having them turn themselves in, and for the sake of justice, they'd get convicted and executed by the law. But all of my staff went against the idea, so I decided not to go with that. The ending they went with instead was after Big Boss dies at the boss's grave, Snake decides to spend what little time he has left living in peace." Even though a PS3 Blu-ray could hold 50 gigs of storage, Kojima still couldn't fit everything he wanted into Metal Gear Solid 4. He originally planned to include both the English and Japanese language tracks on both versions of the game so fans could listen to the one they liked best, but had to settle for one language per disc. He told Famitsu, "For us, we're still not satisfied with the quality we can do. You know, there's not capacity space. There's not enough space at all." And he laughed. "We always talked about where to cut and what to compress. But there's actually some voice recordings still on the disc that got dummied out, which indicates Snake was originally planned to have access to a lot more of Shadow Moses than what got used in the game. Like this cut codec call that would have taken place in the woman's restroom."
You're in a ladies' room, for Pete's sake. Why would any guy be in there reminiscing unless he was some kind of...
Look, this is where Meryl and I first really talked.
Another codec call reveals Snake would have had access to the Wolf Dog Cave, the comm towers, and presumably the areas in between, and maybe some other parts of the island as well.
Behind the bookcase, there's a door hidden back there.
Oh, the one you were talking about upstairs.
It leads to the cave where the wolf dogs lived.
There were also a few cut characters revealed in the Japan-exclusive Metal Gear Solid 4 Master Artworks collection, like a Russian soldier named Adam. Did You Know Gaming had his description translated, and it says the Russian military was originally meant to get involved in the fighting, but the story got too complicated, so the character got axed. This likely ties back into the game's original concept focused on countries A, B, and C. Adam might have had something to do with Ocelot, whose real name is Adamska. Ocelot's also half Russian, but there's not enough information on record to know if there's any connection. Johnny Sasaki was the soldier guarding Snake's cell in Metal Gear 3, and it's his grandson who marries Meryl towards the end of Metal Gear Solid 4. Grandpa Johnny was initially planned to attend his grandson's wedding, but didn't make it in. And the last cut character was Snake Man, whom we don't get much information about, except that he gets his name from the tentacles coming out of his Solidus-like suit. When Metal Gear Solid 4 hit store shelves, many fans noticed that the series' main musical theme, the one you're hearing now, was noticeably absent from the game's soundtrack. According to the game's composer, Norihiko Hibino, that's because Konami faced legal problems after some Russians claimed the series' theme was plagiarized, stolen from a Soviet composer that, interestingly enough, composed it for a 1964 film called Metal. The Metal Gear team denied the plagiarism accusations, but the suits at Konami didn't want to mess with the Russians, so the musical motif was absent not only from MGS4, but also removed from Portable Ops. In fact, it was even cut from Super Smash Bros. Brawl, where leftover code reveals the MGS main theme was once planned for that game as well.
Finally, we can leave all that crap in San Geronimo behind.
Moving on to the next game in the series, Peace Walker. might not have been a numbered sequel, but according to Kojima Productions, it's as mainline as it gets. And it was originally planned to be revealed at E3 2009 as Metal Gear Solid 5: Peace Walker, but the number 5 ended up getting cut simply due to it being a handheld game. Instead of the usual linear adventure, Peace Walker's made up of 153 independent missions, but hiding in the original data is 24 extra ops that go unused, but are still playable with hacks. They generally have the same objectives as many other extra ops, like extracting prisoners with Fulton Recovery, demolishing targets with C4, and eliminating all enemy soldiers in a given area. These 24 unused ops would have boosted the total mission count by 15%, but for whatever reason, they got cut. The final game has 4 AI weapons: the Pupa, Chrysalis, Cocoon, and Peace Walker. But the Peace Walker official artworks collection reveals 4 earlier AIs that got scrapped in development. Did You Know Gaming translated the notes written by concept artist Chihoko Uchiyama, who says there was originally supposed to be 1 AI weapon each for land, air, sea, as well as the Peace Walker, and they were all named after women from classic fiction. The land weapon was named after Belle from Beauty and the Beast, and Uchiyama says it's based on a real-life Sphinx tank. The water weapon was Odette, named for the princess in the Russian ballet Swan Lake. It's based on a Nautilus submarine, although its appearance would have stayed hidden under the surface. The air weapon was named after Scarlet in Gone with the Wind, and looked like a mix between a YB Flying Wind and a B-2 stealth bomber. And Sleeping Beauty was the Peace Walker. It was meant to be the Patriot's ultimate AI, but kept on sleeping after its completion. This next slice of Peace Walker cut content is really more of a case of censorship, which only occurred in the Japanese version. According to Kojima, the PSP is supported by the younger generation. That is why we avoided the animation of blood spill. However, a scene that's critical and essential to the series was pointed out by the rating board. He's talking about the torture scene in Mission 20, which would have knocked the game up to a D rating by the Japanese rating board, which is equivalent to M for mature. But dialogue tweaks and changing the electric torture to tickling torture meant Konami secured the less restrictive C rating. Here's the scene as it appeared in every country except Japan. And here's the same scene in Japan, censored. There actually is historical record of tickle torture being used in Japan, but it was pretty rare and mostly reserved for women. Historical precedent or not, Kojima wasn't too happy having his art censored in his own country, saying, "There's tolerance for fantasy games, but for games where you show war or real violence between people, you apparently can't complain about anything." With this, it seems impossible to communicate something meaningful through games. And now we arrive at the franchise finale, Metal Gear Solid 5. As Kojima's relationship with Konami grew increasingly strained, he ultimately left the company just 1 month after the game hit store shelves. In early 2015, Kojima said fans were going to complain that MGS5 was too big to complete, but his sudden departure later that year, along with the game's abrupt ending and copy-pasted mission structure in the late game, left a lot of fans feeling it was released unfinished. But it's unclear just how much content got cut because of Kojima's falling out with Konami, and how much was scrapped for the same reasons all his games released with lots of unused ideas. Kojima hasn't fully clarified, so whether or not MGS5 was actually unfinished remains controversial even to this day.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer?
To be fair, some content appears to have been cut for artistic reasons. A good chunk of the game gets spent watching the gradual construction of the battle gear, because it was originally planned as a buddy similar to Quiet and D-Dog, as evidenced by the game's internal data. But in the game's final build, it was relegated to a much smaller role. According to Kojima, the battle gear created by Emmerich is used in the combat deployment missions, and to be honest, my plan was to make it available on the actual field. But I noticed that its presence disrupted the gameplay balance during first test sessions, so I eventually had to remove it from the game. Concept art for an older version of Chico can be found in the game's art book, revealing how he would have appeared in Phantom Pain, severely disfigured from the helicopter crash at the end of Ground Zeroes. An early script leaked online says Chico survived the crash and ended up in Zaire, and at some point Amanda would ask Snake to go kill him. Combined with this concept art of the buddy system, some fans think that in a similar sequence of events as Quiet, there would have been a boss fight against Chico, that he'd joined Snake as a buddy. But the authenticity of that leaked script can't be confirmed, or if it's really even Chico in that buddy concept art. So take that last part with a grain of salt. Regardless, it appears Chico was written out of Phantom Pain voluntarily and never made it out of the concept phase. But there was also a lot of content that looks to have been cut involuntarily. The bonus disc bundled with the collector's edition featured a 20-minute video showing off the Kingdom of the Flies, a scrapped 51st mission with 30% of its cutscenes completed. Mission 51 would have tied up some loose story threads, especially for Eli, and despite not making it into the final game, is still considered canon since it's included in Phantom Pain's endgame timeline. Kojima's biggest undelivered promise probably has to be the return to Camp Omega, the military base where Ground Zeroes takes place. In a 2014 interview with Jeff Keighley, Kojima said, "People who own Ground Zeroes will be able to play a different mission at Camp Omega in the Phantom Pain. That's the current plan. There's something of a big feature involved. It's never been done in the games industry before, so I can't go into detail about it. But I think when you experience it for yourselves, you'll be surprised. It's something that's only possible through video games." There are still traces of Camp Omega in Phantom Pain's internal data, but the game never actually takes you there. Data mining also reveals this unused title card for Chapter 3, Peace. Some fans believe Chapter 3, Peace, would have added tons of new missions and plot points, but others think it was never meant as anything more than an ending title card. Like how after the last story mission in Death Stranding, a title card for Episode 15, Tomorrow is in Your Hands, appears on screen, letting the player know they've finished the story, while still allowing them to run around the sandbox and complete special deliveries. Whatever Chapter 3 actually is, Konami's been hinting for years that nuclear disarmament in MGS5 Online is the key to unlocking it. Several groups have sprung up over the years to try and steal everyone else's nukes and attain peace, but so far their efforts have been in vain. Disarmament was originally going to be covered in this video, but the deeper the rabbit hole got, the more truly wild info Did You Know Gaming unearthed, and the full story grew well outside the bounds of this video. So, look out a few weeks from now for the 7-year story of nuclear abolition, what it could mean for the single-player campaign, and how Konami rigged it all from the very beginning. Did you know? In Metal Gear Solid, the prison cell guard gave Meryl more toilet paper than he gave the DARPA chief. According to developers, it's because he was more considerate of the lady. It's worth highlighting that 9 years later, that same guard, Johnny Sasaki, got hitched with Meryl in MGS4. The devil had eyes on her from the very beginning. And it all started with making sure her bog roll was well stocked. Fellas, let that be a lesson to you. I'm David Hayter, the voice of Solid Snake. That TP guard tidbit was revealed in Metal Gear Solid Integral, which was sort of like a special edition of the game released in Japan. Integral featured about 400 codec calls from the developers with behind-the-scenes details that have never been translated into English until this video. Some have never been heard before except by Japanese fans. Today, we're going to level the playing field and highlight 40 of our favorite codecs, revealing cut content, hard-to-find secrets, Easter eggs, and even some developer stories. We'll start at the beginning and work our way forward chronologically. In one of the first Integral codecs, System Administrator Yoshikazu Matsuhana says the original plan for the heliport area was that Snake would have to get around by hiding in the shadow of a moving forklift, but the sequence ended up getting scrapped. The forklift still made it into the game though. It's sitting idle in the back corner of the dock area. Most fans probably never even noticed it was there. The team had big plans for that forklift, but it was ultimately demoted to just being a decoration. Speaking of the heliport, the sound director says if you stand by the cliff's edge, you can hear the sound of waves. You can't see the waves, and they're meant to be far below, so you can just barely hear them. But it's an in-game detail most players would never find on their own. These calls are scattered all over the game. In Integral, you can call codec frequency 140.07 whenever you want, and the staff will tell you something interesting. One's about the codec itself. The programming director says the static when you talk to them, and also when you're talking to Deep Throat, is actually binary code from the game's programming forcibly pasted in as textures. When it's time to find the DARPA chief, you can actually see him about 10 minutes before you're supposed to by manipulating the camera. The devs knew it was possible, so they added a special chime to reward players who found the secret. On his way to meet the chief face-to-face, Snake has to crawl through some air ducts. Looking down, you can see a soldier who appears to be using the latrine.
I hate Alaska. Boy, oh boy, that woman is built all right.
But the devs say this genome soldier's not peeing or pooping. He's just avoiding doing his job. Slacking. Quiet quitting. When you finally find the DARPA chief, one of the pixel artists points out you've already seen him without realizing it. Remember the submarine cutscene at the very beginning? The chief was actually reused as one of the sailors. You can see him right here. Recycling him saved a little time and money. After eavesdropping on Snake and the chief's chat, Meryl knocks out the guard. Again, that's her future husband, and steals his clothes. One of the scriptwriters says, quote, "Don't you want to get a closer look at Johnny Sasaki passed out in his underwear? Get as close as you can facing him and then crouch. Look how the camera angle changes. We call it the sexy rear cam." In some international releases, including the American version, Johnny, in nothing but his nut huts, was changed to him being buck naked with his Johnson blurred. So sadly, some of y'all won't be able to get the full sexy rear cam experience for yourselves. Moving on. Right before the fight with Ocelot, he'll twirl his revolver for 10 or 15 seconds. According to animator Nobuyoshi Nishimura, he originally spun it a lot longer. So long, in fact, that everyone else on the dev team was cracking up from the absurdity. "You can't take things too far," he said, and made it less absurd by shortening the scene. It's worth noting that in Metal Gear Solid 3, Ocelot introduces himself with a full 30 seconds of gun twirling. Apparently, with time, they learned to embrace the absurdity. When fighting against the tank, it fires a shell and Snake flip jumps out of the way. That wasn't actually supposed to happen, but in a way, it gave birth to the Snake we know and love. According to animator Nishimura, the scene where Snake jumps to avoid a shot from the M1 tank came from art director Shinkawa's storyboard. However, in the storyboard, he just rolled out of the way, but I misread it and I thought Snake did a cool jump to dodge it, so that's the animation I made. I was told, "It looks cool, so we'll leave it in." And I think that kicked off the beginning of Snake getting a bunch of flashy animations. During the tank battle, they say if you dodge the first 6 shots but get hit by the 7th, Raven gives you a different cutscene. Here's the normal cutscene when Snake gets hit. And here's the scene if you get hit by the 7th shell. Soon after, you can do a camera trick to spot Otacon earlier than intended, just like the DARPA chief. Again, the devs treat you to a secret chime. After that, you have to guide a remote-controlled missile over an electric floor. One dev says this part was originally a lot harder, but they toned down the difficulty later in development. He also asks the player to see what happens if Snake gets electrocuted when he's in a cardboard box. This is what the normal animation looks like. And this is the animation the dev wanted us to see, box and all. In another call, they encourage us to see what happens if Snake falls into a pit while he's wearing a box. Again, here's the normal animation. And now, the box version. As you approach your first fight with Cyber Ninja, in the hall full of dead soldiers, you can hear some strange intonations. According to the sound director, that was Hideo Kojima's idea, and it's supposed to be Ninja reciting the names of certain railway stations in Kansai, Japan. Those particular stations all had nice rings to them, and I think they match Ninja's Japanese image. During the fight, one of the programmers says he made attacks where Ninja shoots beams from his eyes, and another where he splits into 3, so Snake has to battle 3 ninjas at once. But ultimately, both of those attacks got scrapped. Although the cloning attack was kind of repurposed for the Pain in MGS3, whom they made split into 2. After every boss battle, Snake does a strange gesture as he regenerates his health. According to animator Nishimura, this action had the most troubled development of any animation in the game. Countless other animations got rejected, and with so few results to show for her time, all her colleagues thought she was a slacker. It's kinda hard to make out what Snake's actually doing when he regenerates, so in 2021, Nishimura tweeted some clarification, saying it's supposed to be Snake clenching his fists with all his strength. In the next cutscene, Otacon tells Snake he can deduce which soldier is Meryl in disguise due to her feminine form.
She had such a cute way of walking. She kind of wiggles her behind.
You were really looking.
Well, she's got a very cute behind.
Way of walking, huh?
The devs say that butt-wiggling animation was called Catwalk, and likewise the animation for Snake accepting a Kodak call was Honey Flash. At that same point in the game, the programming director says Otacon had a secret anime room that got scrapped. Quote, "At first, there was a way to get from under Otacon's desk to a hidden room where he stashed his anime merch. The models and textures were all complete, but it ultimately got rejected for various reasons, unfortunately."
Call me Otacon.
Otacon?
It stands for Otaku Convention. And otaku's a guy like me who likes Japanimation.
When Snake's going through the wolf caves, the sound director says, "If you wear the cardboard box here, the dogs might pee on you." There are a lot of situations involving pee and poop in Metal Gear Solid. You could think of it as Hideo Kojima's long-held hobby. In your first sniper shootout with Wolf, the sound director chimes back in to say you can shoot the rats scampering around. But they couldn't come up with a good squeak effect, so they reused the rat sounds from the back alleys in Police Knots, the previous Kojima game, which released in 1994 but never left Japan. Side by side, you can hear they're the same. When Sniper Wolf captures Snake, one of the animators says, "I had to change these animations to avoid model clipping, but in the process, the sexiness got blown out of proportion. Snake got to touch Wolf and probably got a peek at her breasts, so he must have been happy." Following Snake's harrowing escape from his cell, he's pursued by Liquid in a Hind D. A programmer says bullets raining down were supposed to intensify the player's hatred for the chopper. But the dev laments that in the final game, the damage-dealing steam turned out to be more annoying than the bullets. So unfortunately, the sequence actually intensified the player's hatred for steam instead of the Hind. After blowing up Liquid in his chopper and wandering around in the snow a bit, a dev call asks you if you noticed the parachute in the ditch, foreshadowing the later reveal that Liquid survived the explosion. Finding it in first person triggers a very brief cutscene and a codec call.
"Colonel, listen to me. I found a parachute near the wreckage of the Hind."
"A parachute? You don't think that Liquid survived?"
"Impossible. As soon as he jumped out of the pilot's seat, he'd be sliced up faster than an onion on an infomercial."
Moving on to Disc 2. When you're going down on the elevator, or I think technically it might be a funicular, one of the programmers explains that it's not actually moving. Instead, an optical illusion was created by scrolling the surrounding textures up and down. They also say this part of the game was inspired by a certain movie, almost certainly a nod to Akira, the 1988 cyberpunk anime classic, which included a very similar scene. Another call says their homage was beaten to the punch mid-development by a competing video game, probably Resident Evil 2, which also has a similar scene and released 8 months earlier. The Metal Gear team thought about cutting the elevator sequence when they realized their thunder had been stolen, but ultimately decided to leave it in. Careful around all that fire. According to animation dev Nishimura, if you get too close to the blast furnace, Snake will slip and fall in. The animation for slipping came out great, like he stepped on a banana peel. But later, when we got into debugging, we couldn't get it to trigger anywhere. Why? Why? It turned out the animation got cut earlier in development. The hangar housing Metal Gear Rex is 3 stories tall. Call the devs within, and a scenery modeler says they struggled with consistency here in Shadow Moses' largest set piece. If you look at the floor on 1F, it looks one way, but if you look down at the same floor from 3F, it looks different. Whoops. Also in the hangar, there's a cutscene where Snake eavesdrops on Ocelot and Liquid while they very loudly explain their evil plans. Animator Shimizu says she was real proud of her work here, but the rest of the team laughed at her for how she made Ocelot so fast and skillful on a keyboard. Old men in the 90s did not type that fast, especially after their right hand gets cut off. When it's time to duke it out with Liquid mano a mano, enemy logic programmer Yuji Korikado says the fight's stupidly hard on extreme difficulty, which was implemented with hardcore American players in mind. In fact, the entirety of MGS1 was harder in America. In Japan, the original release only had 1 difficulty setting, equivalent to the American Easy mode. Art director Yoji Shinkawa asks us to see what happens if Snake keeps calling Mei Ling but never saves. At first, it's no big deal.
Talk to you later, Snake.
But after a few pointless calls, she gets annoyed.
Come on, Snake, don't call me for no reason.
Eventually, she stops talking and just makes funny faces. Yoji Shinkawa is the guy who designed Metal Gear Rex. In another call, he says they didn't consider how Rex would walk until after the design was already finished, which gave him some trouble. Ultimately, they decided to have it stand on its tiptoes and fold in its heels. Also, Nishimura says the claws on Rex's feet dig into the ground when they settle, but it can't be seen on screen, so it's more like an invisible but canonical design detail. Metal Gear Solid has two endings, one with Otacon and one with Meryl. In the first, animator Yoshimura says she was instructed, presumably by Kojima, to make Otacon's unsteady footing on the snowy hill look like a comedy routine. She also says when Otacon sees the snowmobile, he giddily exclaims, "The snowmobile!" like a childish otaku, shattering the somber tone because he's a silly, silly man. That line appears to have gotten cut, though, and covered up by Naomi's monologue. His talking animation's still left in, but he got muted. Probably for the best.
That's how all life works. Loving each other, teaching each other.
And in the other ending, pixel artist Nakamura says, Meryl's wearing an orange vest in the final scene. Does it look familiar? The design's a little different, but it looks a lot like the vest Dave wears in Police Knots. Try to let your imagination run wild. Meryl was actually in Police Knots before Metal Gear, and Dave was her partner in the Vice unit. Here come Police Knots spoilers, so skip ahead 15 seconds if you don't want to hear them. But maybe the implications that she took it off Dave after he died. His dying words were that he loved the way she smelled, after all. There are Police Knots references all over Metal Gear, but the games don't really exist in the same canon universe. Well, mostly anyway. Also in that ending cutscene, Snake and Meryl see a caribou with its young, which are meant to drive home the theme of passing on your genes. Yoshimura says she worked like a dog to animate natural, believable movements for those two caribou. It's the final scene, after all, so she wanted to make it perfect and redid it again and again. But then she screwed up and deleted all her work, leaving her pale as a sheet. So the caribou that made it into the final game didn't look nearly as good. After beating the game, you're rewarded with a bandana you can wear for infinite ammo. On the development team, they called it seaweed because of how it sways in the wind, like seaweed underwater. So if you want to look cool at a Metal Gear party, don't call it a bandana, call it seaweed. I'm David Hayter, and I'll be back soon with more newly translated Metal Gear content. So subscribe if you don't want to miss it. Did you know Gaming got a hold of Kojima's Sons of Liberty diary? 14 dense pages never translated before. Some juicy stuff in there. Did you know every copy of Metal Gear Solid 2 was almost personalized? Or more specifically, every rose was personalized. According to Kojima's development diary, which we just had translated into English for the very first time, in the middle of production, the team decided Raiden's radio wouldn't show Rose's face. You could hear her voice, but couldn't see her. Kojima's idea was that throughout the game, it'd ask you about your taste in women, preferences, and so on. Then, based on your answers, the game would generate a 3D model of your ideal female fantasy. And it wouldn't be until the final cutscene that you'd finally lay eyes on her. But ultimately, Kojima decided players would be less motivated to save her if they didn't know what she looked like all along. You know, since she's pretty. Because at the time, in addition to being Raiden's girlfriend, her backstory was that she was a journalist who had been taken hostage and you need to rescue her, while the frequency for saving your game was manned by another character called Data. But Data ended up getting axed so that Rose could take his job. Another idea that didn't make the cut was a genderless magician. Kojima went to Hawaii and saw the Magic of Polynesia show, where they had firewalking, magic, that kind of thing. He wrote in his diary, "As soon as I saw that magic, I knew I had to add a genderless magician boss character. They bring out an empty box, cover it with a cloth, and then when they take it away, amazingly, enemies come bustling out from inside." He goes on to say he pitched the genderless magician to several of his staff, but no one else liked it, so eventually he abandoned the idea. I'm David Hayter. You might recognize my voice. I'm Snake's official voice actor. These stories of what might have been come from Kojima's Metal Gear Solid 2 diary, in which he made semi-daily entries for the entirety of the game's development. He titled it Development Diary, Hideo Kojima, 4 Years of Struggle. He published it in the Japan-only Making of MGS2 book and revealed lots of unused ideas, cut content, and behind-the-scenes stories, some of which were never told anywhere else. There are lots of important documents in video game history that have gone untranslated for decades, and this was one of them. Until now. The diary's pretty long, about 87 pages if you printed it out in English, so in this video we'll just cover the highlights. Let's get started. In the final game, there's a part where Raiden swims underwater with Emma. It goes off without a hitch, but while they're underwater, Kojima originally wanted blood seeping out of Emma's crotch. When they surface, Raiden would ask, "Where are you hurt?" And Emma would blush and say, I'm fine. Later in the game, Emma's fatally stabbed by Vamp. Raiden's concerned about how much blood she's losing. Then she'd look up and say, I'm fine, it's just my period, and then fall over dead. Those would have been her dying words. Kojima says his staff unanimously hated the idea, so it didn't make the final cut either. Also in the final game, when Raiden's running around Arsenal Gear, there are 6 rooms, all named after internal organs. Arsenal Gear's stomach, jejunum, ileum, colon, and rectum. But Kojima also wanted rooms called Arsenal Gear Uterus and Arsenal Gear... Listen, the last video I did for Did You Know Gaming got age restricted, so cut me some slack. Anyway, regarding the ship's female anatomy, Kojima said, I was met with opposition from the childish staff, so I decided against it. He also says he wanted a tattoo on Raiden's ass. No dice there either, I'm afraid. Towards the end of development, Kojima wrote excitedly in his diary that Mark Hamill auditioned for MGS2, the guy who played Luke Skywalker in Star Wars.
I'll never turn to the dark side.
He says Hamill delivered an outstanding performance, but doesn't specify for which character. If we had to guess, the voice of Raiden probably makes the most sense. It's unclear why he didn't end up getting the role, and as far as we can tell, Hamill's never spoken about it publicly. Another interesting tidbit Kojima mentioned is he modeled the Fortune fight after Space Invaders. Except the roles are reversed. Fortune's the laser cannon that barely moves, while Raiden plays the role of Invader. Never thought of it that way, but it makes sense seeing both games side by side. But actually, that wasn't how the Fortune fight was originally supposed to play out. Kojima writes in his diary, Raiden's clothes can catch fire during the battle with Fortune. Raiden's long hair, which he's so proud of, can catch fire too. And if the player doesn't put it out, Raiden's hair all burns off and he goes bald. After that, he continues completely bald throughout the entire game, even in cutscenes. The handsome protagonist goes bald in the first boss battle. Hilarious! He goes on to say, various wigs could be obtained throughout the game, including a Bakatano wig, which would have looked like this. If Raiden did a flip, his wig would fall off and the player would have to pick it back up. Ultimately though, Kojima got some pushback from his staff, so bald Raiden didn't make it into the final game. More hair loss was planned as well. In the release version, you can find a shaver as soon as you get to Big Shell. And if you give it to Snake later, he'll trim his beard. But originally, you'd obtain the shaver by tranquilizing Emma and shaking her. Presumably she had it for shaving her body hair. After stealing it, Pretty Boy Raiden would use it to shave his armpits. In an earlier diary entry, when the game was still in pre-production, Kojima said he wanted Sons of Liberty to end in an interactive Mexican standoff. He got the idea from Ringo Lam and Quentin Tarantino movies like Reservoir Dogs. He boasted, quote, I've come up with another industry first, the real-time reveal system. This system's an attempt to present the grand finale of MGS2 in real time, with all the reveal sequences taking place with guns pointed at each other, like a Tarantino movie where 3 or more characters all have their guns pointed at each other, no one able to move. New information's revealed as they keep their guns pointed at each other. New characters join in, and people change who they're aiming at. A new character appears and says, Snake is actually an enemy, so characters change their aim. And then Snake says, you've got the wrong guy. I was framed. It's all a ploy by Solidus, so everyone changes sides again. Things go back and forth between Solidus, Ocelot, Snake, Raiden, Fortune, and Sergei, continuously changing who's aiming at who. I want to do that in real time. The player keeps the weapon button pressed with their gun pointed and watches the game unfold. Once the player lifts the gun, they can't release the button until the end of the game. During this final sequence, the player can change where they're aiming. Flashback scenes would be seen in split-screen mode. Wonder how it'll turn out, end quote. Well, unfortunately, it didn't turn out. In the final game, there was no Mexican standoff. The finale ended up as a one-on-one sword fight instead. We mentioned Data earlier, but several other characters ended up on the chopping block as well, like a couple of bosses, Chinaman and Old Boy, who Kojima writes in his diary got cut due to time restraints. There was also another AI character called Doc, similar to the AI Colonel. I already talked about them in a previous Did You Know Gaming video. But there's another cut character we'd never heard of before translating this diary, Snake's spotter. Here's how Kojima describes him. Quote, there was a legendary sniper in the Vietnam War who killed 64 enemies. But this character, he's not the sniper, he's a spotter. On his first mission, he caused that legendary sniper to miss and got him killed. Nowadays, he works security at Big Shell. His beloved wife passed away, so now he's devoted to his only son. But they become estranged when his son finds out about his past. He's familiar with the layout of Big Shell, and, in the end, he serves honorably as a spotter for Snake. He would have been voiced by Osamu Saka, but when the character got cut, Saka got cast as Colonel Gorlukovich instead. Speaking of voice actors, until pretty late in development, the actor who plays Liquid was also voicing Pliskin.
There's room for only one Snake and one big boss.
Which was meant to obfuscate his identity to the player, to make it less obvious that Pliskin is actually Snake. Good thing he changed his mind. Otherwise, I barely would have been in the game. Me voicing Pliskin did make it super obvious he's really Snake, though. Kinda spoiled the twist. Remember how Ocelot loses his right hand in MGS1, and then in the sequel he grafts Liquid's arm onto his stump? Kojima wanted Solidus to do that too. At some point, Solidus would, quote, fire all US nuclear weapons. But doing so could only be achieved with atomic authorization. Kojima's plan was that after President James Johnson died, Solidus would cut off his own right arm and replace it with the president's. Then, he could use that living arm's biometrics to access the nuclear football. Kojima doesn't say why he eventually dropped the idea, but yeah, maybe it would have been a little silly to have two right-arm stealing villains in the same game. Who knows? According to the diary, Kojima also planned to increase player freedom and make the game less linear. One example would have been selectable missions, which he kinda didn't want to do, but he felt modern gamers demanded it. In his diary, he wrote, "It'll be possible to select the missions that must be completed mid-game and make them diverge. Snake and Raiden will operate simultaneously. I don't really want to do this, but there's no denying it's a trend in today's gaming landscape. The player can decide which mission to go on in real time, while another mission's automatically done by Snake." The final game was much more linear. You don't get a choice of missions. But Snake does still operate independently, most notably when him and Raiden are defusing Fat Man's bombs. Other player freedoms that Kojima did want to make were inspired by Half-Life, which released shortly after MGS1. Kojima bought a copy for reference while making MGS2, and it had a profound impact on him. He couldn't stop talking about it. "I felt like I'd been outdone by the Americans," he exclaimed. "The scene with the accident in the lab gave me goosebumps. Big Japanese games don't have this kind of soul. Even the cutscenes provide a refined level of freedom. And if I was going to make MGS cutscenes interactive, this is how I'd do it. The ending's incredible." Cutscenes in Half-Life happen in real time, with the player free to walk around and do whatever they want as events unfold. You can even shoot the cutscene's participants. Kojima got a lot of criticism that the first Metal Gear Solid wasn't interactive enough, with some critics accusing it of being more like a movie than a video game. But Kojima ended up deciding Half-Life-style cutscenes wouldn't work in a game as story-heavy as Sons of Liberty. If you shoot Pliskin mid-sentence, the game's pretty much broken. So he came up with a middle ground: split-screen cutscenes. On one side, the cutscene plays out, while gameplay happens on the other, like in that Mexican standoff we mentioned earlier. Kojima was super enthusiastic and determined to patent the idea, but ultimately split-screen mode ended up getting cut. Another development detail, told in the November 18, 1998 entry, is how Kojima came up with character names. After buying a phone book from America, he searched for Sarah Connor to pretend he was in Terminator. But the real reason he bought the phone book was to take real people's names and make them into Sons of Liberty characters. Think Peter Stillman, Richard Ames, and James Johnson. One character, Olga Gorlukovich, didn't come from the phone book though. Olga's name was actually taken from a woman who worked at Konami of Europe. Code names were arrived at a bit differently. Snake's codename Pliskin comes from Kurt Russell's character in the 1981 film Escape from New York, whose name is Snake Pliskin. As for the others, Kojima said, "I want the codenames of the protagonist and Dead Cell to be weapon names this time, like Raiden, Fat Man, and so on. I want the nuance that they're not being treated like people, but strategic pawns." Fat Man was the name of the atomic bomb dropped on Nagasaki. Likewise, Raiden's named after the Mitsubishi J2M Raiden, a Japanese World War II fighter plane that the Allies codenamed Jack, which is why Raiden's real name is Jack. Then, after that was decided, named his girlfriend Rose as a tip of the hat to Titanic. Canonically, Raiden doesn't have a last name, but in one diary entry, Kojima writes down the name Raiden Brannigan. Later, he says Raiden's real name is Fanshawe, a name he took from a character in the novel The Locked Room. Fittingly, The Locked Room's about a writer who steals the identity of a guy named Fanshawe, which is exactly what Kojima did. As for Raiden's dark past as a child soldier, that came about because Kojima just happened to stumble across a program about child soldiers on Japanese television one day. "Good timing," he said. "I think I can use this for Raiden's backstory." Kojima also caught a TV special about the Santa Fe artificial stock market. Basically, an AI stock market developed in real-life New Mexico in the late 90s. Kojima said he was going to add a bit in the game where Otacon uses this virtual stock market to get rich, but didn't end up following through with the idea. So, Otacon stayed poor. Speaking of character names, in the release version, Rose reveals she's pregnant with Raiden's baby. MGS2 never tells us the child's name, but in his diary, Kojima says Raiden's going to name him Dave. In other words, name him after Solid Snake. But years later, when players finally heard the kid's name for the first time, in MGS4, it was John, which is Naked Snake's real name. Kojima also wanted to use more famous licensed songs, which would have cost a lot more than what they ended up using. For example, he intended to open the game with Billy Joel's You May Be Right, and end the game with Frank Sinatra's New York, New York. Instead, he had to settle for this as the opening music. And this for the closing.
The best things in life are free.
He also mentioned he wanted to use OMD's anti-war song Enola Gay for the ending track of MGS1. But his sound director, Kazuki Muraoka, stopped him and said kids these days aren't going to know that track. So they recorded an Irish song instead. The best is yet to come. Can't help but notice all three tracks Kojima originally wanted to use released in the exact same year, 1980. It's unclear if that was meaningful somehow or just coincidence. In another entry, Kojima says he wanted to make swimming underwater physically uncomfortable for the player. You'd have the oxygen gauge, just like normal, but after you run out of air, you'd have to mash the action button like a madman to keep from drowning. The goal is to experience the sensation and pain of holding your breath underwater for real, he said. If you press the button, your range will expand and deepen extensively. Kojima's always sought to bring his games out into the real world, often in some unusual ways. Psycho Mantis reading your mind in MGS1's probably the most famous example. He wanted to go far beyond that though, and when Sony showed him the PlayStation 2 for the first time, he lamented that, quote, "It's not the machine of my dreams. It's got no smell. Needless to say, no flavor either." Much to his disappointment, we may never know what Big Shell smells like at sunrise, or the taste of kissing a girly poster in a soldier's locker. You know, reading through this 4-year diary, we couldn't help but notice how big a toll the game took on him. The stress gave him nausea, body aches, headaches, declining mental health, nightmares, constipation, diarrhea. Practically any stress-induced ailment you can think of, he got it. He was constantly in and out of the hospital all throughout development. A couple of days before Sons of Liberty finally released, he gave his doctor an early pre-release copy as a thank you. A month later, in December 2001, he wrote the very last diary entry saying, "The year of the snake is almost over, but my body still isn't back to normal." That's the diary's final sentence. So besides Kojima sacrificing his health to give us MGS2, there's one last bit of trivia for you. That Sons of Liberty released in the Japanese Zodiac's Year of the Snake. The next Year of the Snake, we got Rising Revengeance, and it looks like the series' long-awaited return might arrive in the next Year of the Snake. Or I don't know, maybe not. Just because I'm Snake doesn't mean they keep me in the loop on scheduling.
With over 60 million copies sold across 9 mainline entries, 6 spin-offs, a few remakes, an arcade game, and even a Pachi slot, Metal Gear has solidified itself as a gaming staple. But for every game that saw release, there's a cancelled one that never saw the light of day. In this video, we're going to cover over a dozen scrapped Metal Gear projects, like a sandbox Sorrow game, another starring the boss in World War II, Metal Gear Solid Rising, Mina no Metal Gear, kind of a PSP MMORPG almost, a TCG, and quite a few more. Some were just pitches and unfruitful Kojima ideas, others entered full production, and the rest fall somewhere in between. We'll start with the Sorrow game, the boss in the big one, and Rising, since we got some new info and all three kind of bleed into each other. Back around 2008, when Metal Gear Solid 4 was more or less finished, there was a pitch within Konami for a prequel starring Snake Eater boss The Sorrow. In 2023, longtime Metal Gear artist Takahiro Omori tweeted out, quote, About 15 years ago, I submitted plans for a game about a young Sorrow sneaking through a sandbox, but then Murokoshi's free-cutting Raiden project got the green light, and later Kojima Productions' Mineshi changed a lot, and it eventually became Platinum's. As you can see, Amori deleted that tweet pretty quick, but we managed to screenshot it just before. In other words, there was a pitch within Kojima Productions for a Sorrow sandbox game, but they ended up going with Metal Gear Solid Rising instead. Ultimately, Koji Pro didn't have the skill to make Rising themselves, so Platinum Games took over and turned it into Revengeance. Hold that thought, we'll circle back to Rising here in a minute. Around the same time as that Sorrow sandbox pitch, Kojima was cooking up an idea of his own. It'd focus on all the Snake Eater bosses, aka the Cobra unit, fighting in World War II at Normandy. For folks watching that aren't super familiar with World War II, if you've ever seen Saving Private Ryan, that was Normandy, most famous for the Americans' D-Day beach offensive. According to Kojima, Metal Gear Solid 4 wrapped up in 2008, and the development team took post-project time off right after that. But of course, we were in a situation where we had to start planning for MGS5, so I started coming up with several ideas. I had several ideas for a game featuring the boss and the Cobra unit during the invasion of Normandy. I then handed these plans over to the team so they could take over and make the game. I presented my ideas to the team during the summer of 2008. However, simply dropping MGS5 on the younger staff members was a bit heavy, and there was resistance to doing it without my involvement. The project was on Kojima's mind for quite a while actually. 4 years later at a PAX Q&A he said, "I talked previously about a game featuring the boss as the main character, and this is something I'd really love to make. If I do make that game, it won't be a spin-off. I'd like to make it part of the main series." He brought it up again to UK Games magazine, and by 2014 he was even location scouting in Normandy. But unfortunately, that game never got made, and his relationship fractured with Konami soon after, resulting in him losing control of the Metal Gear franchise. Instead of the Sorrow and Cobra unit games, after MGS4, Kojima Productions went down a different route instead, an open-world slice-em-up starring Raiden. They called it Metal Gear Solid Rising, and it was going to be the first title using the brand new Fox engine. Taking place between MGS2 and 4, Rising would have filled in some gaps and explained how 2009's Pretty Boy turned into 2014's badass cyborg. That much was already known, but we managed to track down some devs to get the inside scoop on more details. They weren't authorized to divulge those details, so we've been asked to keep their identities anonymous. So let's pull back the curtain. Metal Gear Solid Rising was a 3-act tale of revenge and rescue taking place over 2 to 3 years. At the outset, Raiden's not a cyborg yet. He's fully human. His mission is to rescue Olga's child, who's held captive by a wealthy American financier named Wexler. Wexler's keeping her at Area 51, the US military facility. Raiden breaks her free, but Wexler captures him, forces Raiden's partner Vespa to pull out his intestines, then Wexler crushes Raiden's jaw with his bare hands, leaving his tongue hanging down his chest. Fade to black. More than a year later, Raiden has a new black cybernetic body and is being force-fed heavy memory suppressants. Now he's the barely human Black Raiden. This was described to us as a dark part of the game, with Black Raiden now working for Wexler, and the player constantly reminded that every person you kill is a good guy. Eventually, you fight a psychic Japanese guy who appears to Raiden as Solid Snake, Snake's only appearance in the entire game, by the way, and afterwards, Raiden gradually starts to recover his memory. He manages to locate Vespa, and together they break out of Wexler's compound. Raiden's black suit gets damaged in the process, so Dr. Petrovic Madinar builds him a new one. It's a white suit, because now he's fighting for the side of justice. Then White Raiden and Vespa set out for revenge on Wexler. Regrettably, we couldn't get exact details of the ending, but you can probably piece it together roughly if you're familiar with Metal Gear lore. Rising would have been an essential part of the game's main continuity that explained why Raiden changed so drastically between MGS2 and 4, to not only see but experience how he got brutalized, why he's got the trauma about murder, and how he ended up in his cyborg body. The setting was described as futuristic, much more so than MGS4, despite taking place earlier in the timeline. Producer Shigenobu Matsuyama stated publicly that there would definitely be an online mode, and very likely some functionality with Xbox Kinect and PlayStation Move. This was all happening pretty much at the height of the motion controls craze, back in the late 2000s, early 2010s. Unfortunately, the game itself was an unplayable mess. Kojima Productions envisioned an open world where Raiden can cut absolutely anything to pieces, running at 60 frames a second. A short gameplay trailer to that effect was shown at E3 2010, but our inside sources tell us it was entirely pre-rendered. In reality, the game ran at more like 10 frames a second, because, simply put, Koji Pro didn't have the programming chops to turn their vision into reality. So the project was handed off to Platinum Games, who transformed it into Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance, which they made start to finish in just 9 months, with a totally different story. Raiden's black suit from Rising was repurposed for Vengeance, and little else. Ultimately, Platinum's spin-off got solid reviews and was a commercial success, and Kojima was public about wanting to make a sequel. As far as Rising 2 is concerned, I really do have that in my mind and I want to make it, he said. And if we do make it, it would definitely be with Platinum. I don't think anyone else could do it. And personally, I think if we're gonna make a sequel to Rising, it should feature Frank Yeager as a main character versus zombies. Nano machine-powered zombies. That's what I'm proposing to Platinum and the producer of the project. But they seem to be ignoring me. I said I'll even write the story for it, but they said, no, that's okay, don't worry about it. Kojima actually wanted the original Rising to star Yeager, the katana-wearing cyborg ninja also known as Gray Fox, but his team was passionate about using Raiden instead, so he reluctantly let them have their way. Alright, let's wind the clock back a bit. Back to the mid-90s, when Hideo Kojima was working on police knots for Panasonic's console the 3DO, he heard through the grapevine about a machine with specs that made real 3D possible. And it was fast, as opposed to the sort of half-assed 3D you can do on the 3DO. This revolutionary console would come to be known as the Sony PlayStation. In the 148th episode of Hide-chan Radio, which is a now-defunct Kojima Productions podcast hosted by the man himself, Kojima said he'd planned to develop a third Metal Gear for 3DO, but its processing power was weaker than the soon-to-be-released PlayStation. To work within 3DO's limits, Kojima considered making the environment 3D, but the characters only 2D. His lead artist Yoji Shinkawa expounded on that in a 1997 issue of Konami magazine, saying, I think the image Kojima had for Snake was the face of Christopher Walken with the flexibility and muscles of Jean-Claude Van Damme, because originally, we were planning to use digitized live-action characters on top of polygonal environments. Metal Gear 3 never came out on 3DO, but a little piece of it still exists. If you have the 3DO Police Knots pilot disc, by searching deep in the Japanese glossary, you can see Yoji Shinkawa's artwork for a very early rendition of Foxhound, who of course eventually found their way into Metal Gear Solid, almost 4 years later. Here's a translation of the disc's text, which summarizes Foxhound's role in the first 2 games and hints at what's to come in the future. There's also concept art of Meryl and Snake, where he does look a little like Christopher Walken. After Metal Gear Solid launched on PlayStation and blew everyone's minds, a portable reimagining was announced for the GameCom. The GameCom was a failed portable, so you'd be forgiven if you've never heard of it. They were produced by Tighe Electronics, the company probably most famous for making one-game handhelds like these in the 80s and 90s. Fun fact, they actually made one for Snake's Revenge.
I've got rations. Oh.
Glorified calculator games, honestly. But unlike those cheap standalones, the GameCom made use of actual cartridges, and some big-name games actually came to the console, like Duke Nukem and Resident Evil. The Nintendo Game Boy was running scared. Well, not really. The GameCom never even managed to sell 1 million units. As a result, the handheld was discontinued, and some titles that had already been announced ended up getting cancelled. Sonic 3D Blast, Castlevania Symphony of the Night, and of course, Metal Gear Solid. Magazine coverage at the time described it as a port of the PS1 game, but also emphasizing the rescue of hostages, which would have been more in line with the original Metal Gear from '87. Sounds like a mix of both games essentially. It would have been an interesting novelty in the series' history, but probably wouldn't have been much fun, especially by modern standards. Our efforts to learn more from the uncredited devs were mostly unfruitful. They didn't want to talk, so it's unclear how far along in development the game even was. Footage has never been made public, but seeing the GameCom port of Resident Evil 2 will give you a pretty good idea of what we missed out on. We could have had this, but Metal Gear. Truly, we live in the worst timeline. The early 2000s were a heyday for trading card games. Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Dragon Ball, Lord of the Rings. It seemed like every popular IP was getting in on the action. Even Metal Gear. Almost. In the document of Metal Gear Solid 2 Interactive Disc, there's a section briefly revealing the cancelled MGS TCG. Fans could battle and torture each other with Sons of Liberty characters like Raiden, Pliskin, and Fortune, using weapons, traps, and command cards. We won't spend too much time on this one because it's a card game, but we did have the cards translated if you want to pause to read and get a better idea of how the game was played. Each card had its own range, cost, abilities, and so on. Unfortunately, the rules weren't explained in depth, and the cards are apparently unfinished, with mostly copy-pasted text. That said, in broad terms, it does look similar to how the cards in Metal Gear Acid ended up functioning a few years later, so it seems the overall concept got reworked to become an actual video game. And thus, tragically, no Metal Gear booster packs with first edition holographic vamps that are eventually worth more than your house. After Metal Gear Solid 4's launch, fans were expecting an eventual deluxe edition, maybe a year or so down the road, similar to how Integral, Substance, and Subsistence added new content and features to the first 3 games. But MGS4's upgrade never came, and it wasn't till a couple years later that Kojima explained why. Talking on his Japanese Twitter account, he said he was just too busy, that he'd like to see a complete edition with trophy support and 3D, but doing so would mean less time to craft a brand new game. He hoped someone else could make it for him, but no one did. We talked to MGS4's assistant producer Ryan Payton, who filled us in a little more on the behind-the-scenes considerations for MGS4 Substance, like an underground escort mission with Big Mama in Eastern Europe that was 65% complete, and some stuff with the Rat Patrol in the Middle East. Some voiceover work was already done. We covered all that in depth in our MGS Cut content video a couple years back, so we won't rehash it all here. You can go back and watch that previous video if you want to learn more. But as far as why it never got made, Ryan did have this to add.
The experience of MGS4 was that I feel like Hideo was able to get a lot of ideas that most teams would have taken 7 years to build for at hundreds of millions of dollars. Him and the team were able to get that in the game. And I suspect that there was less on the cutting room floor on MGS4 than there was on MGS3 that would justify like a subsistence version or a substance version.
As of the making of this video, Metal Gear Solid 4 is still famously stuck on PlayStation 3. It can't run on PS4 or 5, or any other console for that matter. But Konami actually made an Xbox 360 port, which if it had been released, would presumably be playable on modern Xbox consoles even today through backwards compatibility, just like the 2011 HD collection. So if it was finished, why didn't it get released? According to Ryan Payton, Microsoft was desperate to get the game on their platform. He went on to say, "One fateful day, the Konami R&D team hosted a meeting where we got to see the fruits of their labor, Metal Gear Solid 4 running beautifully and smoothly on an Xbox 360. It looked almost identical to the PS3 version, but because the game was around 50 gigabytes in size, which fit fine on one PS3 Blu-ray disc, Konami would have had to ship the Xbox 360 version as a half dozen or so DVDs. The internet would have laughed at us." Kojima was also opposed to the concept of ports altogether, and explained that a game like MGS4 built specially for PS3 wouldn't be a good fit on other consoles, and therefore releasing such a port would be disloyal to fans. After a while, he said he was, quote, fed up with people asking for it. But then they released the aforementioned HD collection on 360 soon after. And nowadays, literally every Metal Gear is playable on Xbox except MGS4. So take that for what you will. Another interesting port from a historical perspective was an Amiga version of the original Metal Gear. For the younger folks watching, the Amiga was a home computer released in '87, with 16-bit graphics considered ahead of its time. For example, here's the Amiga playing Shadow of the Beast. Looks pretty advanced compared to an NES game, doesn't it? Metal Gear was slated for the Amiga, and Konami even got as far as advertising it, but it never came out. Metal Gear's NES port was famously very different compared to Kojima's original release on the MSX2 home computer. The NES version even went on to get its own direct sequel, Snake's Revenge, which isn't part of the mainline series. The canned Amiga port would have been handled by the same team who did the NES version, a company called Banana Development. Talking to UK Games magazine in 2011, Banana employee Charles Ernst explained why the NES version turned out the way it did, and addressed the long-forgotten Amiga port as well. You can pause and read, but long story short, when he was porting MSX to NES, he wasn't provided a debug version to work from, and couldn't rip graphics directly from the ROM like he'd usually do. So Ernst had to just kinda play it himself and videotape it, then do his best to replicate everything within the NES's limitations. Took him 7 months. As far as the Amiga port, he said, quote, "There were plans to create an Amiga version, but it was shelved after most publishers dropped the Amiga due to piracy. Our company was supposed to port the Amiga version and we did the box art mock-ups to encourage Konami. Unfortunately, it doesn't appear that Amiga port's locked in a vault somewhere, maybe to get leaked someday for curious fans to finally get to play." According to Ernst, he's 99% certain it never got made. Those advertised Amiga screenshots had different graphics than any port that did get released, but they're likely just mock-ups. Speaking of which, besides the NES and MSX versions, back in the day, Metal Gear also got unique Commodore 64 and MS-DOS ports, so there's still plenty alternate versions of Zanzibar Land for Mega fans to explore. The MS-DOS version even has cutscenes not found anywhere else, if you want to call them that. Charles Ernst did that port too, by the way. Moving on. Released in 2006, Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops was an interesting project, as it was almost 2 completely different games before it settled into its final form. One of them simple to explain, the other is not so simple. We'll start with that one, the complicated one. It was born from Kojima's ideas for a new IP, which he then grafted Metal Gear onto, resulting in an Animal Crossing Metal Gear Frankenstein. He called it Mina no Metal Gear, or Everyone's Metal Gear in English. Kojima wrote about it on his blog in 2009, and it's difficult to summarize, so we'll just quote him at length. Translated into English, he wrote, "Everyone's Metal Gear." That was the tentative title I wrote in the planning drafts that preceded Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops. I wrote the draft based on the idea that it was possible to create a full-fledged action game for the PSP. With no time to spare, I decided to take elements I planned for a separate original title and bring them to the PSP version of MGS. That was Everyone's Metal Gear. But I'd like to expound a little on the original plan before it became Metal Gear. Upon buying, turning on, and starting up the game, the world is empty except for the player. As the player progresses through the story, they encounter many people and worlds to increase the number of inhabitants in their own world, who they can become friends with. Any friend can be used as a player. However, there are no continues. When you get a game over, a dead player cannot be used again. Players increase their number of friends through various forms of communication, such as story mode, competitive and cooperative play, chance encounters, and AP soldiers, that is, soldiers that used to be in ops, who become friends when they connect to an access point. Put simply, you start out alone in the world, and by taking your PSP on the go and communicating with people and places in the real world, you increase your world's inhabitants. The more you play and the more you interact with the real world, the more inhabitants you'll have in the game world, which will eventually become your friends, who serve as your troops. And in order to create troops, it's important to have a relationship with everyone, people and regions that live in the real world. Rather than competing to get friends, the system's that if you get to know people, they'll be registered in your PSP and appear in your world. For example, let's say persons A, B, C, and D all have their players fight to the death. Then there's winners and losers, but if a player dies, they don't come back. However, the other player's characters that you came in contact with there will become real in your PSP world, even if they don't become your friends. In this way, the number of registered players in your world increase to 100, 500, or 1,000, and so on. The more people and places you interact with, the more inhabitants you have in your world. There are stories, events, and missions to turn those registered players into friends. There's also competitive and cooperative play. The project that brought this idea to MGS was Everyone's Metal Gear. I was busy with preparations for MGS4, so I entrusted this project to a producer and director other than myself. After many twists and turns, it eventually morphed into Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops." End quote. You can see how some of those ideas did eventually make their way into Portable Ops through its connectivity features, which paved the way for Mother Base and future installments. Kojima's long desired to create a game with no continues, and we'll touch on that soon in a sister video to this one, exploring all Kojima's unrealized ideas for new IP and non-Metal Gear projects. So subscribe if you don't want to miss it. As for the other pre-portable ops concept, the simpler one, we covered it a couple years ago, but it's arguably more on topic now than it was back then, so we'll briefly reiterate. According to Ryan Payton, another early version of portable ops would have been a PSP game that lets you relive series history through a gauntlet of boss battles. The game would have run on the Subsistence engine and focused on local and online multiplayer. In other words, a portable co-op boss rush campaign covering the full franchise timeline. Ryan told us, those initial ideas probably only survived for a month or two, in terms of it being more boss-focused. This is just my interpretation of what was going on in those early days, which was, how do we create an authentic Metal Gear experience for PlayStation Portable that satisfies fans, perhaps more than the Acid series up to that point? And also, how do we get that game out the door fairly quickly? So the idea was to dust off existing boss battles and add some co-op elements to it as well. But those ideas didn't last very long because we quickly pivoted towards what ended up becoming Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops. After that early premise fell by the wayside, Portable Ops was developed at a breakneck speed with just 9 months development time. We'll cover this next one pretty quick because it was cancelled, but then it got uncancelled a couple years later. It's still unreleased though as of this video's writing, and it's not a video game. It's Metal Gear Solid the board game, and a pretty high-end board game at that, designed by a hotshot in the industry, with intricately crafted pieces, and initially priced at $125. That's an expensive board game. It was originally announced in 2018, and prototypes were made playable at conventions, but in 2021 the license deal fell apart. When the news broke, we got in touch with the game's designer, Emerson Matsuuchi, to get an inside scoop on the story and how it would have played. You could maybe think of Matsuuchi like the Kojima of board games. He previously designed Spectre Ops and its sequel Broken Covenant, both of which focus on stealth, strategy, and got stellar reviews. So seeing him make Metal Gear his next project was intriguing. Its cancellation was even more intriguing. That made it a forbidden fruit we'd never get to taste. We kept in touch with Matsuuchi over 2 years while the deal was in limbo, which delayed this video considerably. Recently headway was made, and now the game's back on track. It's currently available for $100 pre-orders, scheduled to release about a month after this video goes up. So, good news, you're gonna get to play it. Bad news? We lost our scoop. Oh well. Story-wise, it's basically a retelling of MGS1, and as far as gameplay, well, it's stealth espionage action. It comes with VR missions, a 109-page integrated graphic novel, and seems like a worthy experience for 1 to 4 Metal Gear fans who like board games. This is starting to sound like an ad, isn't it? It ain't, I promise. We spent a lot of time tracking this story, so even though it's now uncancelled, we still felt compelled to talk about it. Hopefully it doesn't get recancelled. And finally, the Metal Gears Kojima wanted to get remakes. Snake Eater's currently in development, but that's not actually one of the games he wanted to see brought up to modern standards. A little while before Ground Zeroes came out, at E3 a fan asked for remakes of Solid 1 and 2 in the Fox engine, the same engine that powers MGS5. Kojima said 2 didn't need a remake, however the first game could definitely use one. But he hoped someone else could make it for him, that there's a studio out there who could put in the love and passion it deserves. Over the next couple years, Kojima started thinking that maybe actually he'd like to do it himself. At the next Gamescom, he said, "If I was having some of my staff members going back to remaking a game, I would go with Metal Gear Solid 1. Of course, I would not want to make a standard remake. Something similar to what Planet of the Apes is doing, taking the best of the past and doing it in a very modern style and bringing something brand new." Then at the next year's Taipei Game Show, quote, "I would like to play around with Shadow Moses as an open world, so I think MGS1 would be good, but no one's interested in making it. We have the engine, the tools, and the people. It's one that most deserves a remake." Regarding the first 2 Metal Gears, the ones on MSX, Kojima said Ground Zeroes and Phantom Pain brought the series story full circle, but in the process some contradictions slipped through and continuity broke in some places. He said ideally he'd like to remake both to fix their stories and bring the games up to snuff, but it'd require a huge team, and at the moment he couldn't spare the manpower. Kojima's famous falling out and eventual exit from Konami came soon after, so unfortunately we'll probably never get to see those broken connections reforged on modern consoles, which probably applies to all the games described in today's video.
Did you know Metal Gear Solid 5's Chapter 3 might actually exist? Before we go any further, we want to let you know that Did You Know Gaming talked to some former Konami employees who gave some exclusive insight into the subject. But first, we need to cover some background. The story starts September 1st, 2015, the day Metal Gear Solid 5 hit store shelves. The game's campaign is divided into 2 chapters. The first 31 missions comprise Chapter 1, Revenge, and the last 19 missions are Chapter 2, Race. But 2 weeks after the game launched, a data miner known as Saladin found an unused title card for a 3rd chapter called Peace. Nobody really knew what it meant though. Maybe Chapter 3 featured more story missions scrapped in development, or maybe it was never meant as anything more than just a title card. Like how after Death Stranding's last story mission, a title card for Episode 15, Tomorrow is in Your Hands, appears on screen, letting the player know that they finished the story, but can still run around the sandbox completing special deliveries. Or maybe the truth is somewhere in between. We'll get back to that in a minute though, because around the same time, something else was found in the game's data. An 8-minute cutscene that was only meant to be seen if players in MGS5 Online achieved a nuke-free world. A month after this discovery, Konami announced details of the secret nuclear disarmament event. Basically, Konami said that all nuclear weapons on a particular platform, whether it be on PlayStation 3, Xbox One, or PC, PlayStation 4, have to be disarmed and the nuke count dropped to 0. The cutscene already discovered through data mining was meant to play if, and only if, fans actually achieved that goal. In Did You Know Gaming's last Metal Gear video, there were a lot of comments saying disarmament had already been achieved, but sadly that's not true. It's not entirely true, that is. The game's online mode, players build forward operating bases, or FOBs, that can house up to 60 nuclear missiles. You can invade other players' FOBs and steal their nukes, either to keep for yourself or to dismantle for the sake of peace. To achieve a nukeless world, everyone has to mutually agree to disarm, or failing that, some players have to invade each other's bases to actually force peace at the end of a gun. The core message of the series has always been Kojima's opposition to nuclear weapons, and according to the man himself, the struggle for disarmament is the entire point of the game. Once fans realized this was their mission from Kojima, a subreddit sprang up called Metal Gear Philanthropy, determined to do exactly just that. An opposing subreddit was also formed at the same time, the Metal Gear Patriots, who dedicated themselves to making sure the philanthropists failed. Everyone had already seen the disarmament cutscene on YouTube, and by then, in the months that followed, Konami started hinting that a legit disarmament was actually the key to unlocking Chapter 3. Like this tweet from their official account in late 2015 saying, "The truth can be found for peace," with a capital P, which they followed up with references to the philanthropist and patriot subreddits. Kojima made some tweets of his own, which encouraged fans to rid the world of nuclear weapons. These sort of tweets continued for months, like when the official Metal Gear account even told fans the game contained, quote, less than 4 chapters, when Ground Zeroes and Phantom Pain were bundled together onto one disc for the definitive edition. A fan lamented that it wouldn't actually include Chapter 3. Then Konami's Robert Peeler hinted that the definitive edition still, quote, contains the same nuclear disarmament goals as the initial release. So... ... Another fan told Robert that he was full of it, but Robert insisted he was not. Another year came and went with the philanthropist still not even close to abolition. They got a shot of adrenaline when Konami shared a fan's tweet that told everyone to disarm, and that it was the only way to unlock Chapter 3. This was the most direct language Konami had used yet, and the message seemed clear. Lots of groups sprang up around this time, all determined to rid the world of nukes to unlock Chapter 3, like the Never Be Game Over subreddit with thousands of members. On February 2nd, 2018, the disarmament cutscene was triggered in the Steam version of the game. There was a brief celebration from fans, but they quickly realized that there were still thousands of nukes left on the server. Konami announced that they were opening an investigation, then returned a couple days later to announce that disarmament wasn't legitimate, and the cutscene was actually triggered by a glitch. The cutscene was triggered a few more times over the years, but every time Konami conducted an investigation, they then announced that the disarmaments were illegitimate. Kojima even sent out a mysterious tweet saying that the Metal Gear saga was not over yet, and the search for peace remained fruitless. But all of that changed in 2020 when the coronavirus swept the world and left billions of people locked in their homes for months on end. And that's when one individual, known as the Hung Horse, took advantage of the situation to build a new army of abolitionists and positioned himself as their leader. They called themselves the Anti-Nuke Gang, and we recently spoke with Hung Horse to get his side of the story, and he said, "I formed the group once the lockdown restrictions happened in early 2020. I lost both of my jobs because of the pandemic, since they were considered non-essential business. businesses. So I figured more people would be in the same boat as me. And after making the group, barely anything got done because of the low numbers. So I decided to try data mining the game in order to inspire others to spread word of the group, and found a few things most people skimmed over, like unused music soundtracks from Mission 43. My plan seemed to have worked. Numbers built up rather quickly, hitting somewhere over 100 members in May, and at this point the PlayStation 3 was 13 years old. Not as many people were using it compared to newer platforms, which meant that the PS3 server had fewer nukes and actually made for an easier target. There were almost 20,000 nukes on the Steam server, but only 800 on PS3. So everyone in the anti-nuke gang who didn't actually have a PS3 bought one and swore that they'd achieve a true disarmament, whatever it took. They worked in shifts around the clock to invade other players' FOBs and steal their nukes.
No nuclear program will go unseen. Roger that. Someone manages to build another nuke, we'll be there to shut him down.
And for a brief moment, on July 28, 2020, they finally did it. They got the nuke count down to 0. The cutscene was triggered, and word spread like wildfire that 5 years after the game's launch, peace had finally been achieved. The story was celebrated on practically every gaming site, from Eurogamer to Games Radar and even Vice. Hung Horse was interviewed by Ars Technica, where he and his gang were celebrated as heroes. Kojima retweeted the story himself, twice actually, on both his English and Japanese accounts. That was a proud moment for me and the boys, Hung Horse told Did You Know Gaming. Just as they'd done before, Konami announced that they were opening an investigation to determine if it was legitimate. But instead of a few days, this time Konami's investigation actually dragged on for months. The anti-nuke gang were waiting restlessly, hoping to finally see what was hiding behind the curtain. Then finally, 3 months later, Konami announced the disarmament didn't count because of, quote, improper conduct. They banned one of the gang's members and said that they were taking countermeasures to prevent it from ever happening again. The anti-nuke gang was crushed. Konami never revealed the details of the gang's improper conduct. But Hung Horse put it like this: we ran into what can only be defined as an invincible set of nukes that do not belong to any base. If you're familiar with the MGS5 FOB system, a nuke is always placed on an FOB after a player makes it. But there were 40 or so of these invincible nukes that didn't have FOBs to belong to. They simply existed without FOBs, and we call them phantom nukes. There's simply no way to get rid of them in-game, and they're actually on every single server. The reason the phantom nukes exist is likely due to when players start a new save in Metal Gear Solid 5, or when they're banned. Their offline assets get reset, but not their online assets. Anyways, the number sat at 40 for quite a few weeks before our programmer, Steffer, momentarily disabled the refresh count on the server for a solid minute, actually allowing us to achieve disarmament legitimately for the first time ever. If it actually wasn't for Steph, it would have never happened, and we'd have only gotten down to 40. The unnamed gang member that Konami banned, as it turned out, was Steffer. Using his hacking skill, Steph would later show the gang that Konami had disabled the cutscene from ever getting triggered again. Basically, they changed a 1 to a 0 in the game's code, and not just on PS3, on every platform. Even if a completely legitimate disarmament were to happen today, the cutscene's coded to never play again. That was the countermeasure Konami alluded to at the end of their investigation. So after months of fighting for peace, the gang threw in the towel and their morale was shattered. The Hung Horse told Did You Know Gaming, the majority of us gave up fighting the good fight because we had all learned that disarmament is rigged. I think the reason it took Konami so long to investigate the PS3 disarmament is because it began with a legitimate effort in getting rid of nuclear weapons, but ended with 40, the phantom nukes, being taken out immediately. It probably confused them for quite a while, but I suppose it was easier for them to label it a false disarmament than it is for them to fix or acknowledge the phantom nuke bug. Countless members tried messaging them about the phantom nukes, and as far as I know, they've done nothing about it. Therefore, achieving a legitimate disarmament under Konami's rules is literally impossible. Almost 2 years have passed since every nuke was purged from the PS3 server. The Hung Horse is still the leader of the anti-nuke gang, but a lot of their members deserted when they realized that the game was rigged.
They played us like a damn fiddle! Give it back! This isn't right, that was ours! Konami announced that they were going to shut down the PS3 server later this month, and presumably every other server someday in the not too distant future. And they quit bothering to release official nuke counts years ago. The Hung Horse told Did You Know Gaming, after seeing all of this, it seems pretty obvious that disarmament is the key to something spectacular, right? I could sit here and theorize all day, but the truth is that nobody knows. The most popular opinion seems to be that Chapter 3 is hidden behind the disarmament achievement, and if done legitimately, it'd explain why Konami always has to investigate each disarmament that happens. Him and his gang have been trying in vain to plead with Konami to fix the phantom nuke glitch and bring it to the attention of the Metal Gear community, hoping if enough stink gets raised, Konami might actually
actually listen. But without community support, there's simply nothing 100 fans can do against a multi-billion-dollar corporation who's rigged the game that they're actually playing. Metal Gear fans have given years of their life to a pursuit of peace. So come on, Konami, give them a chance to find out what's behind the curtain. It's a pretty cool story, huh? The little guys against the mega corporation, David versus Goliath, all they want is peace. But what if I told you that it was propaganda? An elaborate cover story propagated by the anti-nuke gang to make themselves out to be the good guys. Everything we told you so far is true, but Metal Gear fans know that sometimes propaganda can be made up entirely of truth. But it's the facts that are omitted that make it propaganda. It wasn't until we were almost done making this video, back in February, that we found out the gang's story wasn't everything it seemed. The story retweeted by Kojima, the interview Hung Horse did with the gaming press, everything the gang told us in private, they all left out some key details. In reality, Anti-Nuke Gang was just a front organization for a campaign of bots, hacking, and misinformation, and the gang itself didn't even know. Only Hung Horse and his top men knew fact from fiction. So let's rewind back to when the world was locking down in the wake of the coronavirus. Hung Horse really did start a nuclear abolition campaign with the purest of intentions, and wanted to do it legit, but even after building an army of 100 peacekeepers, they could barely make a dent in the nuke count. From May to June, they had only managed to get it down from 850 to 800. They were literally shooting BBs at a freight train. The problem was actually threefold. The first issue was a rule change by Konami. Nuclear weapons don't have an offensive purpose. You can't destroy enemy FOBs with them or anything like that. They only serve as a deterrence by giving nuclear-armed players a blockade that makes it difficult for anyone else to invade their base. Originally, you could invade somebody's base to try and steal their nukes every few hours, but a couple months after the game launched, Konami issued a game-breaking update. The first time Konami announced the official nuke count on each server, it showed that they were actually dropping like flies. In November alone, console gamers already disarmed 87% of all nuclear weapons, and it looks like Konami didn't want people achieving peace too quickly, or maybe at all. So they rewrote the rules before the philanthropist could win the day. It's kind of complicated, but to explain in simple terms, instead of a few hours, the update made it so that each nuke could give only one full day of a blockade. So let's say somebody had a maximum of 16 nukes, they could actually only be invaded once every 16 days. Now the second problem was finding which players even had nukes. The game's nuke tab is pretty much broken, so you kind of have to refresh over and over again to find a nuclear armed player. And if someone with nukes hasn't logged in a while, they actually stop showing up on the tab entirely, so they're near impossible to find. And the third major problem is just how ridiculously easy it is to cheat and give yourself free nukes. It's supposed to take a huge amount of in-game resources, and about 24 in-game hours to build one nuke. They're not cheap. To build a bunch of nukes, even if you've already hoarded the resources and left your PS3 logged on non-stop, it's supposed to take weeks. But with cheats, 60 nukes can be acquired instantaneously. So even just one cheater can make disarmament virtually impossible, giving themselves 60 nukes over and over, and the 16-day blockades that come with them. But there's a lot more than just one cheater. Around the time the Anti-Nuke Gang was facing the reality of these insurmountable obstacles, a mysterious hacker named Steffer showed up in the gang's Discord. He created a bot to help locate all the nukes with the click of one button. The bot would search every player's base and identify which ones were in possession of nuclear weapons. Here's footage of it working in real time. But Steph, the mad scientist that he is, grew more ambitious and eventually transformed his reconnaissance bot into a fully autonomous nuke destroyer. He dubbed it the Nuke Hunter Deluxe. And after identifying a player in possession of nukes, in a split second it would log onto their Metal Gear account, destroy their own nukes, and vanish without a trace. He offered his services to the gang, who, after some discussion, accepted it. Many of these conversations were later covered up and deleted so no one would ever find them, especially the gaming press who came sniffing around after they had achieved disarmament. Hung Horse and his top guys knew what was happening, but the lower-level gang members and the new recruits were kept in the dark. Steph's bot made short work of the remaining 800 nukes, whittling them down to just about 40 in under a week. All that was left was the Phantom nukes. Now here's footage of what that actually looked like. There's no base invasion, not even any gameplay. The Nuke Hunter Deluxe searches the entire database of players, finds a nuke, logs onto the owner's account, and immediately destroys it. Blockades are bypassed entirely. It all happens in a split second. We actually had to slow down this footage so you can see a nuke getting destroyed before the bot moves into its next target. According to Steph, if Konami checked his player profile, all they'd see is the most motivated base invader in the world. While all this was going going on, everyone outside the top circle was made to believe their righteous crusade was finally working, as the new count grew ever closer to 0. But really, they were just a cover story for Steph's campaign of botting and hacking. It was Steph himself who eventually told Did You Know Gaming the truth, and when we asked why he resorted to cheating instead of doing it legit, he sent us this.
I'm no hero. Never was. Never will be.
Did You Know Gaming pressed for a better explanation, and he just said, I just think that it sucks that Konami never communicates with the players about anything. We all try to get them to acknowledge the flaws in the online systems and how disarmament is impossible, but they never once commented on it. I know it's technically cheating, but the online part of MGS5 is such a disaster, it truly is the only way that event could ever have happened. All the holes in MGS5 security and anti-cheat measures make it practically impossible to achieve disarmament, and even if the gang somehow managed to beat the stacked deck, the Phantom Nukes would always be the ace on bottom and prevent the nuke count from ever reaching 0. So yeah, basically it's all rigged. Konami clearly put their thumb on the scale with the beefier blockades, but a lot of these issues probably weren't intentional on their part. The nuke tab isn't broken because Konami wanted it that way, and the anti-cheat measures aren't a joke because Konami likes cheaters. It seems they just didn't care enough to fix it. And we don't want to assign malicious intent, but the argument could certainly be made that Konami's fine with these issues existing, because they're happy the status quo of peace never being achieved. Did You Know Gaming asked Steph why he'd finally come clean after all this time, almost 2 years later. He said sticking to the original story never got them what they wanted, so they might as well come out with the truth. Did the gang's leaders really believe in their own cause?
Steph's pretty pessimistic if disarmament would even unlock anything at all, saying,
I do think the original plan was to give people a substantial reward after disarmament was achieved, namely Chapter 3. Whatever it may have been. But because of the troubled development and Kojima Productions getting the boot, I think they just gave up on it entirely. Maybe half-finished files are sitting on Konami Dev's PC somewhere. I mean, who knows? Hung Horse was similarly pessimistic. He wants to believe something big is hiding behind Konami's investigation, but suspects all their hints might have just been a cynical ploy to drive engagement. He said, I want to believe it's something big, but I personally think the hype surrounding disarmament helps give the game the attention it needs to get more people playing it again. That may even be the only reason it even exists, meaning that disarmament is just a metagame of sorts, and it's only meant to be treated as such. I mean, this is a game about chasing phantoms after all, and this is Kojima we're talking about. It really might be nothing but a massive troll. Or the reward for disarmament was originally meant to be something grand, something big. But after Konami and Kojima's falling out, it got downgraded to something much smaller. One popular theory is that players will receive a Hideo Kojima emblem in their profile as a reward. The other 29 emblems can be acquired through normal online play, but the last one so far has remained unattainable, with Konami never revealing how players are meant to unlock it. Another theory has to do with an unwatchable video on Konami's official website. The site has 35 videos called vlogs for fans to watch, but a mysterious 36 videos still off limits and labeled classified, which some fans believe will get unlocked when a legit disarmament happens. Some believe it's a congratulatory video, possibly from Kojima himself. There are tons of fan theories out there and entire subreddits dedicated to theorizing about it, but no one's really known what will happen if a legitimate disarmament ever happens. So in an effort to find out what's really behind the curtain, we decided to ask Konami directly. We had a contact at Konami PR for a while, not a leaker or anything like that, just a regular old public relations manager. We talked before, but when we started asking questions about disarmament, they ignored our email. So then we reached out to Robert Peeler, we mentioned him earlier in this video. He was Metal Gear's community manager up until 2018. And the guy who ran the official Metal Gear Twitter account. He's actually one of the main people hinting about Chapter 3, so we'd asked if he'd be willing to share what he'd known, and he told Did You Know Gaming, I think Konami's being strict about it just comes down to respecting the design. The idea being that it's very hard to be a fully nuclear disarmed ecosystem, just like it's hard to be a fully nuclear disarmed society. Metal Gear has often presented these themes, and I speculate the team wanted players to consider the matter very seriously, going so far as to reward them if, and only if, they truly achieve peace. He's pretty vague throughout our entire conversation. He doesn't work for Konami anymore, but he's still in the community management business, so it's understandable he wouldn't want to put his career in jeopardy by spilling too many beans.
When we asked point blank if there was really nothing but an attaboy on the other side of the Konami investigation, he said,
Possibly. I'd love to say for sure, but since I don't work with them anymore, I can't say for certain what they'll do. Maybe nothing? Well, I think much of the team from the game still works there. I hope they have plans in mind for Metal Gear even today. I mean, they did when I left. There's certainly a possibility, but definitely not a guarantee. If I was still there, I'd demand we do something big. LOL. But not my call. Winky face. Now, while that was enlightening, it wasn't the concrete yes or no we're looking for. So then we asked Asim Tanvir, who took over as Metal Gear Community Manager in 2018. But he said Konami didn't even keep him in the loop on their plans if peace was ever achieved. So we decided to email the man himself, Hideo Kojima. Way back in 2014, we were invited to interview him in Japan about Metal Gear Solid 5. So we figured it was worth the shot to see if he'd answer some questions about disarmament, the Phantom Nukes, and if there was really anything to unlock. He didn't email us back. But he made a tweet later the same day, which might have just been coincidental timing, but Kojima hadn't tweeted about disarmament in years, so we like to think it was his way of responding in his trademark mysterious fashion. Whether or not that's the case, he tweeted out one short sentence. This was a social experiment. Robert Peeler told us it's as close as anyone's ever gotten to a direct answer from him. But what does it mean? After weeks investigating disarmament, we still don't have a definitive answer to this big question. But now we know why peace has never been achieved, and why it'll probably never be achieved. Most of the anti-nuke gang were left completely in the dark about the Nuke Hunter Deluxe, so this video is going to be their first time hearing the truth, that they actually did cheat, and it wasn't just to disarm those last 40 Phantom Nukes. After we concluded our months-long investigation, Hung Horse told us, "By now, you know that my group was pretty much just a cover story for Steph's action. But I hope that you will at least remember that there was a legitimate effort with members trying to dismantle nukes, besides Steph, behind the curtain. And that this legacy I left behind is a real Kojima-esque move in and of itself." As for Steph, he'd given up on the search for peace, but not before setting his bot loose on a few other servers, destroying tens of thousands more nukes just for the fun of it. And as a bit of an FU to Konami, they're shutting down the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360 servers on May 31st, and someday, all the other servers as well. Most of the anti-nuke gangs disbanded, and what's left of them hope Konami will fix the game-breaking bugs before the day of reckoning ever arrives, even though most of that hope has already been beaten out of them. Maybe there's something really awesome laying in wait, but at this point it seems likely that the reward for disarmament is nothing. Still though, many of them have spent years fighting for a nuke-free world. The stories focus mostly on the anti-nuke gang, but there are thousands of more fans. The Philanthropists, Never Be Game Over, and countless others who have given huge chunks of their life to this cause. All they want is a real chance to achieve peace. A legitimate peace that'll make Kojima proud. I mean, even if it's all for nothing but a title card.
There are few true auteurs in the gaming industry, and there is no other like Hideo Kojima. Despite entering the business with little knowledge of how development actually worked, Kojima's ideas and work ethic set him apart from his peers, allowing him to become one of the industry's most revered developers. This is how a poor kid with dreams of making movies would become one of the most celebrated game developers of all time. This is Hideo Kojima. Hideo Kojima was born the youngest of 3 children on August 24, 1963 in Setagaya, Tokyo. His family was somewhat wealthy and moved often when he was young, first to Osaka when he was just 4 years old. From there his family would move to a small city named Shirasaki, and then to Kawanashi Higayo in the Kansai region. From an early age, Kojima loved several forms of art, particularly film. This love for movies was instilled by his parents, who were avid fans of Western, horror, and European cinema. It was a tradition in the household to stay up every night and watch a movie together. Kojima wasn't even allowed to go to sleep before the film ended. When he turned 10, Hideo's parents encouraged him to watch movies in theaters on his own, on the condition that he'd return with the film's brochure and discuss its themes and direction. Kojima frequently returned home from school before his parents finished work, and used television to escape his loneliness, watching anime, cooking shows, wildlife documentaries, and a variety of Western shows to pass the time. Using art to escape his isolation is a practice that has followed Kojima to this day. He's since said that when he travels, the first thing he does in his hotel is turn on the TV to deal with his feelings of loneliness. Watching films and television so frequently led Hideo to make his own art, inspiring dreams of becoming an illustrator or filmmaker. He eventually teamed up with a friend who owned an 8mm camera and started filming his own home movies. In high school, Kojima convinced his friends to collaborate on a zombie movie for their school's culture festival. Once completed, they attempted to sell tickets for the movie to attendees, hoping to raise funds to buy movies. The friends only managed to sell a few tickets by the end of the festival, not even enough to afford a single film. Unfortunately, Kojima would know tragedy early in his life, as his father passed away when Hideo was just 13 years old. Kojima himself also had frequent near-death experiences, being attacked by a dog, nearly drowning in a river, and almost getting run over by a train during his formative years. These experiences deeply affected Kojima, who described these near-death moments as the most intense memories of his childhood. The death of Hideo's father also left his family in a tough financial situation, which put pressure on him to enter a traditional career. Kojima explained, the common belief in Japan at the time was that fine schools and proper education led to safe and well-paid jobs. This was the Japanese ideal, a regimentation which had consequences for everyone who tried not to follow the mainstream. My dreams of becoming a movie director came into conflict with this unwritten rule of society. It made life harder for me. It made me feel alone and rejected. Bowing to the pressure, Hideo attended a normal university and studied economics, but he refused to give up on his creative dreams. During this period, he hoped to write a novel that could easily be turned into a movie. He submitted short stories to numerous magazines, none of which were picked up. Kojima later concluded that this was because the magazines preferred brief, 100-page short stories, while his own writing frequently topped 400 pages. While in college, Kojima picked up the newly released Famicom, and would play a variety of games during his downtime at school, including shoot-em-ups like Xevious and text adventures like the Portopia serial murder case. However, none would have the influence on Hideo that Super Mario Bros. Would. Kojima explained to G4, "The game that changed my life. The game of my destiny was Shigeru Miyamoto's Super Mario Bros. Till then, I pretty much had the notion that film and video games were separate entities, but then I realized that even in video games I could do creative things just like they're done in the movies." Though he was already in his 4th year studying economics, Kojima decided to pursue a career in game design. At the time, the video game industry carried a social stigma in Japan, as many felt it was full of creatives that couldn't make it in filmmaking or writing. Though most of Kojima's friends, family, and professors discouraged him from switching careers, Hideo's mother was supportive and told him he could do whatever he wanted in life. This bolstered Kojima's confidence, and he began looking for work in the games industry. Kojima applied to a company called Konami, though it wasn't because of any specific game that they made. It was simply because Konami was listed on the Japanese stock exchange, the only games company to hold that accolade at the time. Not even Nintendo was listed during this period. Kojima saw this as a status symbol, and hoped that working for a publicly traded company would shed a more positive light on his career change. Kojima joined Konami in 1986 as a planner for their MSX team. He was initially disappointed in this assignment, as he wanted to be part of their Famicom team and felt that the MSX's color palette was too limiting. The crew at Konami were very much like Kojima, a group of creative hopefuls that saw video games as a second chance to make their dreams come true. Despite this, Kojima struggled to fit in at first. Planners were practically unheard of on the MSX team, and many of his colleagues considered Kojima dead weight because of his lack of technical skills. Kojima was given an assistant director position on Penguin Adventure, the sequel to 1983's Antarctic Adventure. He worked himself to the bone to prove himself, often refusing to take bathroom breaks and regularly dreaming about the game during his sleep. This hard work caught the attention of one of his superiors, who pulled him off Penguin Adventure and gave him the opportunity to direct his own title. Kojima spent half a year developing a concept called Lost World, but he quickly found his co-workers' lack of confidence wasn't wholly unfounded. He had little knowledge on how to create a game from scratch, how to schedule development, or how to deal with technical issues like memory constraints. After 6 months, little progress had been made, and Konami's higher-ups pulled the plug on Kojima's game. This left the young developer devastated, and worsened his co-workers' mocking. Konami gave Kojima one last opportunity, reassigning him to a military-themed game that was struggling to gain traction. Originally, the title had a heavy action focus, but the MSX2's hardware struggled to handle more than a handful of moving sprites at any one time. Hindered by this poor combat, Kojima brainstormed ways to make the gameplay more interesting. He thought back to the film The Great Escape, and how the characters in that story ran away instead of fighting. Deciding that escaping would be a more interesting objective, Kojima redesigned the title from the ground up as a stealth action game. When he told his coworkers, they thought he was crazy. Kojima told The Guardian, "I had such a hard time convincing people. I had so many things going against me at that time. The type of game I wanted to make didn't exist at that time. The odds were stacked against me, and it was very hard to earn the trust of the team." With his team resistant to his ideas, development stalled for months. At one point, Kojima was so frustrated that he considered quitting Konami, but he approached a senior official for advice. This official helped Hideo pitch his ideas to the team, and eventually helped win them over. Despite this, Kojima still came into conflict with his programming staff, who either had no idea how to implement his ideas or outright refused to work on them. The result of this struggle was Kojima's debut title, Metal Gear, which released on the MSX2 on July 17, 1987. Interestingly, though the box art for the title features traced art of the character Kyle Reese from The Terminator, the cinema-loving Kojima had nothing to do with this. Though Kojima originally wanted to join Konami's Famicom team, working on the MSX turned out to be a blessing in disguise. The computer's advanced hardware and hardcore audience let him design a more intricate game than he would have been able to on the Famicom. Metal Gear was eventually ported to the Famicom without Kojima or his team's consent, and Hideo only played it after picking it out of a bargain bin. He later criticized this version from cutting out content from the MSX version. Regardless, Metal Gear was a surprising critical and commercial success. Critics heaped praise on the title, and it quickly became one of the MSX's best-selling adventure games. The NES version would also go on to sell more than 1 million copies in the United States alone. Now with the hit under his belt, Kojima began work on another new game, this time a story-driven cyberpunk noir, called Snatcher. Again, he pulled from his love of film to find inspiration for this new title, borrowing ideas and imagery from sci-fi classics like Blade Runner and Akira. When Kojima pitched the idea of his cyberpunk adventure to Konami's trademark department over the phone, he became frustrated, as they did not understand what cyberpunk meant. Because of the nature of Snatcher's gameplay, Kojima only needed about half as many developers as a regular Famicom development team. Additionally, he recruited character designer Tomiharu Kinoshita to help capture a unique look for Snatcher's cast. Kojima treated Snatcher more like a film or anime, with enough story content to fill out 6 chapters. However, after 1.5 years of development, the team only managed to finish 2 of these chapters before Konami demanded the development wrap so they could release the game. Kojima and his crew desperately tried to squeeze in a final chapter to wrap up its story, but Konami refused to budge on the deadline. Snatcher was released with a cliffhanger ending in late 1988 for both the PC-8801 and the MSX2. Though the title received critical acclaim, it did not sell well, and has since become a cult classic. In 1990, Kojima returned to complete the story in the Japan-exclusive RPG spin-off SD Snatcher for the MSX, but this took a backseat to another project that caught the developer's eye. After Metal Gear's success, Konami released a sequel called Snake's Revenge without Kojima's involvement. This game focused on action, and was developed for a Western audience, never releasing in Japan. On a train, Kojima coincidentally ran into an old coworker who was working on Snake's Revenge. He told Kojima that he didn't feel like Snake's Revenge was a true successor to Metal Gear, and that Hideo should make his own sequel. On his way home, Kojima began brainstorming what his version of a sequel would look like. He credits this chance encounter for his continued involvement with the Metal Gear series. By the next day, Kojima approached his superior with a plan for Metal Gear 2, Solid Snake, and though his superior was enthused, Konami's sales department had second thoughts. Despite great success in the North American market, Metal Gear had sold poorly in Japan. Kojima and his team traveled to Konami's headquarters and spent an entire day arguing with the sales team before the project was finally greenlit. The team obsessively pursued realism for the sequel, gathering as many books, movies, and model guns as possible for research. They even reached out to an ex-Green Beret for advice, and spent days playing war games in the mountains with infrared guns. Some members of the team even started showing up for work in combat fatigues. This dedication paid off, as when Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake was released for the MSX in July of 1990, it remained one of the console's best-selling games for 6 months straight. The title was originally released exclusively in Japan, but was eventually localized for international audiences in 2006. After this, Kojima returned to adventure games, overseeing a remake of Snatcher with full voice acting and a proper ending on the PC Engine Super CD-ROM Squared system. After his difficulties with programmers in the original Metal Gear, Kojima developed his own scripting engine so he could personally control everything in this new game. This tight grip over creative control would become a staple in each of Kojima's titles. The first game to implement this engine would be Kojima's next adventure title, Police Knots. This game was an extension of several themes Kojima explored with Snatcher, but also drew inspiration from the ethics of organ transplantations and brain death injuries, anti-Japanese sentiments from the film Rising Sun, and NASA documentation about the negative effects of space travel on the human body. The story was also inspired by buddy cop dramas like Starsky and Hutch, which were a particular favorite of Kojima's growing up. Harkening back to his love for film, Kojima borrowed many cinematography techniques for Policenauts. He perceived a lack of quality in the production values of other games, and wanted Policenauts to live up to the standards set by movies. Kojima also originally omitted subtitles from Policenauts to evoke a more cinematic feel. However, after receiving a letter from a hearing-impaired fan, he changed his mind and included text. After 4 years of development, Policenauts was released for the PC 9821 in 1994, and was later ported to multiple systems. However, one system in particular captured Kojima's imagination, and would shape his career for decades to come. While finishing up Policenauts, Kojima heard rumors of Sony's new console, the PlayStation. When he finally saw the device, he set out to create a new Metal Gear title, wanting it to be the best game on the PlayStation. Kojima had wanted to make a 3D Metal Gear game for the 3DO, but that console's discontinuation made it an easy decision to jump to the PlayStation's superior hardware. Around this time, Kojima also noticed the artwork of Yoji Shinkawa, a new hire at Konami. Kojima saw Shinkawa's potential and recruited him to help define Metal Gear Solid's art direction and character designs. The decision paid off, as Shinkawa's art became an integral part of the Metal Gear brand. Kojima felt that Metal Gear Solid needed to be as believable as possible, and turned to California's Hunting Beach SWAT department to learn as much as he could about modern tactics. He even personally bashed down doors with battering rams and handled machine guns for research. Much of the stealth gameplay that defined the first Metal Gear was updated for the new 3D environment, and it's possible for players to complete the game without killing any character except its main bosses. This gameplay was massively influential for the industry, and would be copied by countless titles afterwards. Kojima later said, "If the player isn't tricked into believing that the world is real, then there is no point in making the game. If you can captivate the player without having to trick them, then the game is worthwhile. That is the most tiring task. A lot of adjustments had to be made, down to the tiniest detail like individual desks." Further fulfilling Kojima's desire to bring games closer to movies, Metal Gear Solid featured an intro and opening credits sequence that resembled a film far more than other video games. Metal Gear Solid was released in September of 1998, both critical and commercial success. Several publications praised its storytelling and gameplay, crediting the game for popularizing the stealth genre. Both IGN and users on the official PlayStation blog ranked Metal Gear Solid the best game on the PlayStation. It was also featured in the Smithsonian American Art Museum's exhibition on the art of video games in 2012. Worldwide, Metal Gear Solid has sold more than 6 million copies. A figure that surprised Kojima. He explained, "We were just making the game that we wanted to play. I don't think I had any expectations that it was going to be a big game. So when I heard that it was selling well in America, it didn't feel real." Ecstatic with the game's performance, Konami quickly commissioned a sequel that would utilize the more powerful hardware of the PlayStation 2. Kojima immediately began to work on the sequel, completing its design document in 1999 before moving into full development. Given the success of Metal Gear Solid, Kojima's team was given a budget of over $10 million for this new title, which Kojima put to good use by furthering its cinematic elements. The sequel featured several hours worth of cutscenes, incorporated motion capture technology, and touted a score co-composed by Hollywood veteran Cary Gregson Williams. It also had a twist worthy of a big-budget blockbuster. Despite the controversial twist, Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty was again a critical and commercial hit, proving that Kojima's success with Metal Gear Solid on the PlayStation 1 wasn't a fluke. Kojima rocketed to superstardom in the games industry, becoming a well-known name amongst journalists and consumers. During the 2000s, he continued producing a variety of titles, including multiple Metal Gear spin-offs, remakes, and re-releases, 2 titles in the mecha anime-inspired Zone of the Enders franchise, 2 action RPGs in the Tighe series, and the Castlevania reboot Lords of Shadow. In 2004, Kojima returned to Metal Gear with the intention of creating a prequel set in a completely different jungle environment. This title drew more from Cold War political fiction and the spy thriller franchise James Bond. Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater was released in November of 2004 for the PlayStation 2, and is considered one of the greatest games of all time. Though Kojima intended for Snake Eater to be the conclusion of the franchise, fan demand meant that a new installment went into development right away. Kojima originally declined the director's chair, but signed on as co-director alongside Shuya Murata after intense negative feedback from fans. This new title would also be the most cinematic game Kojima made to date, with several hours worth of cutscenes. In fact, the title holds the record for longest single cutscene in history, clocking in at 27 minutes. Metal Gear Solid 4 Guns of the Patriots was released on June 12, 2008, to universal acclaim, and has since sold over 6 million copies. Kojima's personal life and relationships also impacted his professional career during this time. He often played games with his son, including Super Smash Bros., though his son questioned why none of Kojima's characters were playable. When Kojima heard that his friend Masahiro Sakurai was developing a sequel to Smash Bros., he practically begged Sakurai to include Snake in the roster. Unfortunately, this was infeasible, as Sakurai was already too far into Melee's unusually short development cycle. However, Snake was later included as the first third-party character in the franchise with Super Smash Bros. Brawl. Kojima's mother also kept up with their son's games, though it would sometimes take her over a year to beat any one of them. When she finally beat Metal Gear Solid 3, she called Hideo and simply said, "It is finished." With more than 2 decades of success to his name, Kojima was promoted to Vice President and Corporate Officer of Konami Digital Entertainment in 2011. This new role allowed him to further spread his influence and experiment with viral marketing. Kojima ordered the creation of a new game engine dubbed the Fox Engine, which he claimed could be used to develop anything from first-person shooters to third-person adventure games. In August of 2012, Kojima showed off the Fox Engine with a demo titled Metal Gear Solid Ground Zeroes, a prologue for Metal Gear Solid 5. In December of that year, an unknown developer named Moby Dick Studios showed off an impressive in-game trailer for The Phantom Pain, directed by a man named Joachim Mogren. Many commentators noted the visual resemblance of The Phantom Pain to Ground Zeroes, and that Joachim was an anagram for Kojima, believing this to be an elaborate teaser for a new Metal Gear. Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain, was revealed in March of 2013, and was later released in September of 2015, with a Hideo Kojima game proudly stamped above the logo. Once again, the title received universal acclaim and shipped more than 6 million copies as of December 2016. Kojima's love for multimedia again seeped into Metal Gear Solid 5, with actor Kiefer Sutherland replacing longtime voice actor David Hayter as Snake. Though the game had a budget of more than $80 million, a great deal of its content was cut, including several missions from later in the game and a more elaborate ending. Though there has been no official explanation, it is believed these cuts were due to undisclosed friction between Kojima and Konami's higher-ups. For years before the release of Metal Gear Solid 5, Kojima stated that he'd wanted to work on a horror game, and in particular to reboot the Silent Hill franchise. In August of 2014, a first-person horror game called PT was released on the PlayStation Store. The game, which featured a looping hallway and cryptic story, quickly caught the attention of internet content creators who wanted to solve its mystery. Despite its creators intending for PT to take over a week to complete, players cracked it within just a few hours of release, revealing it to be a playable teaser for a new Silent Hill game starring Norman Reedus from Kojima and film director Guillermo del Toro. The reveal came as a surprise, but nonetheless, Silent Hills quickly became an anticipated title. However, things were not well behind the scenes at Konami. On March 3, 2015, IGN Italia posted an interview with Kojima where he confirmed that Metal Gear Solid 5 would be his final title in the franchise, and that he considered the series complete even if it continued without him. The very same day, Konami announced that they were restructuring their company, and Kojima's name was nowhere to be seen on the list of personnel changes on their website. Within a couple weeks, Konami scrubbed the Kojima Productions logo and the tagline, a Hideo Kojima game, from the Metal Gear website, promotional materials, and even Metal Gear Solid 5's box art. Though there had been no official word from either party, GameSpot reported that there had been a falling out between Kojima and executives at Konami due to power struggles. This resulted in the publisher restricting access to basic corporate resources at Kojima Productions, and demoting most of Kojima's developers to contractors instead of employees. Though there was never any official comment on it, the falling out had become the subject of public scrutiny. In late April of 2015, Konami confirmed that Silent Hills had indeed been cancelled, and pulled PT from the PlayStation Store. They even disallowed users from re-downloading the title if it were no longer on their console. On October 9, 2015, Kojima left the Tokyo office of Kojima Productions, or Number 8 Production Department as Konami had renamed it, for the final time following a going-away party thrown in his honor. Despite photographic proof, Konami feigned ignorance for the reason for this party, asserting that Kojima wasn't leaving the company but rather taking a long vacation. The Los Angeles branch of Kojima Productions, since renamed Konami Los Angeles, was closed the following month. During the 2015 Game Awards after Metal Gear Solid 5 won Best Score and Best Action-Adventure Game, host Jeff Keighley stated that Konami had barred Kojima from attending the show to accept the awards. This news was met with audible boos from the crowd. Finally, on December 15, 2015, Kojima's departure from Konami was made official, though neither Kojima nor Konami ever detailed the official reasons as to why. Still, Kojima took this in stride instead of lashing out at Konami, taking to Twitter to say, "Today marks a new start for me. I'm committed to be involved in creative activities for as long as I live. Look forward to what's coming next." On December 16, 2015, just one day after officially leaving Konami, Kojima founded a newly independent Kojima Productions. Shortly afterwards, a partnership between Kojima Productions and Sony Computer Entertainment was announced, with Kojima to direct a new AAA title. At E3 2016, Kojima dramatically took the stage at Sony's press conference to thunderous applause, stating,
"Hello everyone, I'm back!"
His game was revealed to be Death Stranding, with both Reedus and Del Toro returning from Silent Hills, and several other Hollywood stars later being attached to the game. Death Stranding has proved to be somewhat mysterious, with Kojima stating he hopes the game and a potential sequel would establish a new genre. Death Stranding is set to be released on November 8, 2019. Though the chapter of Hideo Kojima's career at Konami has come to a close, a brand new one is opening up for the developer. From his unique cinematic approach to game development and design, to his use of social media to discuss his love of film with fans, Kojima has cemented his place in multimedia history, an impressive feat for someone whose start in gaming was met with ridicule. Very few developers can say they deserve to label their games with their name, but you know a Hideo Kojima game when you play one.
Did you know? Hideo Kojima originally envisioned Metal Gear Solid as a recreation of Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake. Metal Gear 2 was originally released for the MSX2 home computer system. While the system was popular in Asia, they were rare elsewhere. Because of this, Metal Gear 2 wasn't released outside of Japan until 2006, where it was repackaged with Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence. Many of the gameplay components in Metal Gear Solid were introduced 8 years earlier in Metal Gear 2. Players were given the task of rescuing a female contact, Holly White, after her cover was blown. A similar situation played out in Metal Gear Solid with Meryl Silverberg. The female contact in both games operates on radio frequency 140.15 and becomes romantically involved with Snake. Gray Fox was not the first ally-turned-enemy ninja in the Metal Gear series either. After defeating the Metal Gear 2 boss Black Ninja, he is revealed to be Kyle Schneider, who helped Snake in the original Metal Gear. Metal Gear 2 also had a chase scene up a spiral staircase, an ambush by 4 hidden attackers in an elevator, and a battle with a Hind D chopper using Stinger missiles. It even had a radio frequency on the game box needed to progress the game, just like in Metal Gear Solid. While Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake provided a baseline for Metal Gear Solid, technological changes made it possible to present Snake in 3D for the first time. This meant he had to be a more physically fleshed out character. Kojima assigned concept artist Yoji Shinkawa to design the character. Kojima said, "I asked Shinkawa to create an older, hard-boiled dandy character, but he said it's better to have a younger character. So Solid Snake became about 20 to 40. I asked him to make the character nimble and muscular, but with the body like a Van Damme. Regarding the face of the character, I wanted it to be something like Christopher Walken. The result came out to be the one you will see in the game. It's not like a Schwarzenegger at all. He has to perform espionage, so I wanted the character to be like a cat, but still have a strong presence." Another major influence on Snake's character came from the 1981 John Carpenter film Escape from New York. Kojima has openly admitted that he drew inspiration from the film's protagonist, Snake Plissken, when creating Solid Snake. During an October 2015 interview with The Hollywood Reporter, Carpenter mentions that Canal Plus, one of the rights holders of the film, wanted to go after Metal Gear Solid for copyright infringement. Carpenter, as one of the other rights holders, explained, "I told them not to do that. I know the director of these games and he's a nice guy, or at least he's nice to me." Before going into video games, Kojima admitted that he wanted to be a director. In a special promotion carried out by Japan's largest video retail chain, Tsutaya, they created a list of 15 magnificent movies that influenced Metal Gear Solid. Among these films are The Guns of Navarone, The Great Escape, Goldfinger, Die Hard, Full Metal Jacket, and Dawn of the Dead. Kojima has said that Planet of the Apes gave him the courage to create a video game with a strong anti-nuclear stance, which became a running theme in all of his games. Predator supplied the idea for the stealth camouflage camouflage suit worn by the cyborg ninja Gray Fox. The true names of Solid Snake and Otacon, David and Hal, originated from Kojima's favorite film of all time, Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. If the player gets the Otacon ending, the two have an exchange that acknowledges the reference. Some fans have speculated that Snake was named for his voice actor David Hayter. This is incorrect and purely coincidental. Unlike most games at the time, Metal Gear Solid used professional actors to portray characters. Unfortunately, because of the blurred lines between games and the Screen Actors Guild rules, many of the voice actors used aliases. The only exception was David Hayter. However, under the credits for the European version of the game, the voice of Snake was listed as Sean Barker. This was the alias Hayter created based on the character he played in the 1994 live-action movie Guyver: Dark Hero. All of the real names were finally published in the game's 2004 GameCube remake, Metal Gear Solid: The Twin Snakes. The game also includes a re-recorded script using almost the exact same cast. Hayter actually gave up half his salary so Konami could afford to bring back the original cast for The Twin Snakes. Metal Gear Solid was revolutionary because of its use of 3D in-game cutscenes. Kojima has said that he aimed to create a game that was not only graphically superior, but more importantly, create a realistic experience. In order to do this, he created all of the cutscenes with polygons rendered in real time on the PlayStation's hardware. The only pre-rendered CG used for the game was created for promotional purposes. The word Solid in the title had 3 meanings. The first meaning was a reference to Snake's name being Solid Snake. Another meaning was to emphasize the switch from 2D to a more solid world of 3D. The third meaning was a jab at the video game company Square. Kojima told the publication Gamers Today, "A square is a two-dimension thing, and I guess the president of Konami wanted this game to surpass Square. They wanted to make it a cube, you know, like solid 3D, so it's got that meaning too." In order to create his solid world, Kojima used Lego bricks to plan out each level. The team would then position cameras over each structure in order to give them a real-time perspective of the layout and proportions, allowing Kojima to direct the entire scene. This process took as long as it sounds and was very taxing on Kojima's family life. During a presentation at the University of Southern California, Kojima explained that his son would see his work and report back to his mother that his dad plays with Legos all day. The game also has quite a few secrets and Easter eggs. While going through the caves, if the player faces Meryl and slaps her, she whistles and the wolves will attack Snake. However, if the player can immediately hide under a cardboard box after the slap, a wolf will venture over, lift its leg, and urinate on the box. Using the pee-soaked box will allow the player to move through this area without being hassled by those wolves. Speaking of Meryl, Metal Gear Solid was not the first time she's shown up in a Kojima game. Her character originated in Kojima's 1994 adventure game, Policenauts. References to Policenauts can be found throughout Metal Gear Solid. In Otacon's office, there's a poster of the Policenauts box art, and during Meryl's ending, she laughs and calls Snake Dave. Even though Snake's name is a reference to Dave from 2001: A Space Odyssey, this interaction possibly references Meryl's interactions with her Policenaut partner, Dave Forrest. Kojima envisioned Meryl's character in the original Metal Gear Solid story as a preteen inspired by Natalie Portman's character in Leon the Professional. Interestingly, Meryl's age wasn't changed because of the inappropriate age difference to Snake, it was because the weapon she used, a Desert Eagle, couldn't be managed by a 12-year-old girl. In Policenauts, Meryl has a tattoo on her left arm which appears to be a blue-colored version of the original Foxhound logo from Metal Gear 2. In Metal Gear Solid, the same tattoo can be seen on her left arm. The connection is more obvious in the GameCube version of the game thanks to its higher graphical fidelity. Did you know Hideo Kojima started the 800-page script for Metal Gear Solid 2: Sons of Liberty in November 1998, barely 2 months after the release of the original Metal Gear Solid? To motivate his team, Kojima came up with an American-style work concept. He gave every person an idea notebook, requiring them to write down at least one idea each day that might add to the gameplay. If an idea seemed promising, the team ran programming tests on it, and when a new mechanic worked and improved the game, they kept it. The abilities to dispose of bombs with the freezing spray and to peek around corners while sidling against a wall are just 2 of the additions that came from these notebooks. Metal Gear Solid 2 was the first game in the franchise to use motion capture. Mr. Motosada Mori, a military advisor, guided the actors' movements and proper weapon handling. Mr. Moray even made the development team reenact scenarios to get a better understanding of how the military and civilians might react in them. Though the series is fairly realistic, the style of MGS2 might nearly have gone in a different direction. An early model of Snake reveals an alternate texture style that never made it into the game. Called Shinkawa Touch Experimental Model, the texture attempts to replicate the brushwork in Yoji Shinkawa's concept art. A cel-shaded model of Mei Ling, who was eventually cut from the story, can also be found. These early models suggest different visual styles were explored before deciding on the more realistic approach of the final game. Sound director Kazuku Muraoka wanted to use the game's increased budget to give MGS2 the Hollywood action music it deserved. When Muraoka and Kojima saw the movie The Replacement Killers, they were impressed by the film's soundtrack. Muraoka said, "We especially liked the energy and the excellent use of synthesizers." The development team contacted the film's composer, Harry Gregson Williams, and gave him a compilation CD of his past works, burnt by Kojima himself. Gregson Williams, who's worked on Armageddon, Enemy of the State, and The Martian, remembered the incident saying, "Flattery will get you everywhere. And as soon as I received the CD, I realized that I've never done a video game before, so why not do it? They seem like very decent people, so that's how I came to be doing it." According to Kojima, the original plot of the game involved nuclear weapons inspections in Iraq and Iran, and had Solid Snake trying to intercept Metal Gear while it was situated on an aircraft carrier. Unfortunately, after 6 months in production, tense political situations in the Middle East became a concern. Only a month before the game's release, the September 11th attacks in New York prompted the team to change the finale. The original ending had the ship Arsenal Gear dislocate the Statue of Liberty and crash into Manhattan. There's also a newscast showing the Statue of Liberty resting on Ellis Island after the credits. Another change influenced by the event was the spelling of Raiden in Japanese. It was initially written in katakana, which closely resembled the lettering for Laden. Not wanting their protagonist to be associated with Osama bin Laden, the team instead wrote Raiden in kanji. Kojima wanted Raiden to give players a new perspective on Snake. He elaborated, saying, "In MGS2, I wanted to give depth to the Snake character, which is very hard to do when the player is playing Snake himself. So I got the idea of distancing the viewer from Snake to provide a more objective view of him. Thanks to this system, Snake grows in stature. When you play Raiden, who is only a beginner, and then encounter Snake, he suddenly seems more impressive." Raiden's reveal as the protagonist in MGS2 was well hidden during development. Almost nobody outside of the development team knew that Raiden existed, due to covering up Raiden's face or switching his model for Solid Snake's in promotional trailers. This was apparently a reference to Terminator 2 Judgment Day. The twist that Arnold Schwarzenegger was not the bad guy runs parallel to the twist of Snake not being the protagonist of Metal Gear Solid 2. It's no secret that Kojima often finds inspiration in Hollywood films. MGS2 also references Kojima's favorite movie, 2001: A Space Odyssey. In the opening scene, a brief shot shows the tanker's name, Discovery. This is the same name as the spacecraft operated by HAL 9000. In the same scene, Snake drops down onto the tanker in a similar way to how the Terminator is introduced in Terminator 2, kneeling on the ground with electric pulses dancing around him. Kojima created Snake and Raiden to parallel movie giants Godzilla and King Kong. Solid Snake is a creation of man and science, akin to Godzilla. Raiden, however, was lured by a woman, captured by Solidus, and taken to the city, just as King Kong was. According to Kojima, Solid Snake frees Raiden, who is free to return from whence he came. But Solid Snake is Godzilla, and as long as Metal Gear exists, he will stay with men and keep fighting. The game also makes intentional nods to the 1997 film Titanic. The beginning scene features a tanker sinking in a similar manner before transitioning into a conversation between two lovers named Jack and Rose. In MGS2, Snake uses the alias Iroquois Pliskin. The name Snake Plissken plays homage to Kurt Russell's character Snake Plissken in the 1981 John Carpenter film Escape from New York. And to keep the snake theme, Iroquois means rattlesnake. The character Vamp was originally meant to be female, but was changed to be male after the team created the character Fortune. For Vamp, Shinkawa took inspiration from famous Spanish flamenco dancer Joaquin Cortez. Vamp not only reflects his appearance, but also imitates his bold dance moves. Vamp's original theme, played in the Making of Metal Gear Solid 2 documentary, even has flamenco undertones, although this theme is changed in the actual game. Vamp was somewhat merged with a cut character called the Chinaman. Based on the actor Jet Li, the Chinaman was a Vietnamese man from New York's Chinatown. He had a body dragon tattoo that came to life as soon as he dove into water. Vamp ended up inheriting a quarter of the Chinaman's moves, including walking on water and walls, as well as his boss stage. MGS2 was the first Metal Gear game where the player could freely aim weapons and observe surroundings in first-person view, which would reveal some interesting details. Killing an enemy in first person, for example, splattered blood on the player's screen. Several seagull gags were also implemented. If the player looks up at seagulls for a few seconds, bird droppings hit the screen. Running across areas where bird excrement is visible causes Raiden to slip and fall in a cartoonish manner. Dog tags were also a new addition to the series. Players get these tags by shaking down guards and pointing a gun to their head or crotch. The majority of tags are the names of fans who entered a dog tag contest on Konami's website. The developers wanted players to feel as if their actions truly affected the game's world. This included interactions with other characters. If the player aims a gun at Snake while he's sleeping in strut B, he immediately wakes up and points his gun at Raiden. Repeated hostility will lead Snake to be wary of the player, drawing his weapon whenever the player comes near. Snake isn't the only ally you can anger either. Rose gets pretty touchy as well. If a player shoots multiple seagulls, Rose scolds Raiden for shooting defenseless animals. You can also anger her by punching or kicking hostages or taking a peek up the hostage Jennifer's skirt. These actions cause Rose to refuse to save your progress until you apologize. Several funny and borderline creepy Easter eggs can be found in the game too. While the Colonel's AI is malfunctioning, he will spout off all kinds of gibberish. One codec has him quickly saying, These names are also chanted by Gray Fox in the first Metal Gear Solid. The words in this recurring event are train stations of the Myokin Line, which operates in the Kansai region of Japan. In the same sequence, Raiden gets a call while running naked through Arsenal Gear, and if the player doesn't answer, the radar screen is eventually replaced with a real-life silent video of a young woman. While Raiden is making his exit through Arsenal Gear, all the rooms bear names of digestive organs. Kojima took this idea from the 1940 Disney movie Pinocchio. In the film, Monstro, a colossal sperm whale, swallows Pinocchio and Geppetto. Kojima uses this to give the players the impression that they were being swallowed by a huge machine and gradually digested. Did you know Metal Gear Solid 3 was created as an apology of sorts for Metal Gear Solid 2? Although MGS2 sold well, fans were polarized. In response to this, Metal Gear Solid 3 periodically mocked Raiden. The most obvious jab was Major Ivan Raidinovich Rykov, a character that resembled Raiden. Rykov was the implied secret lover of Colonel Volgin, also known as Thunderbolt. The name Raidinovich is another joke, as it can be interpreted as Thunderbolt's bitch. Kojima explained that he intentionally placed the effeminate Rykov in MGS3 so players could vent their Raiden-induced frustrations. In a way, Kojima felt the same frustration, telling PlayStation 2 Official Magazine, "I put my career on the line with Raiden. I did it to entertain people by totally destroying what I had built up, earned and achieved with MGS1. I really wanted people to be amused by that, but they started bashing him and I guess I wasn't happy." Kojima never intended to direct Snake Eater. His goal was to hand production over to his team, but he ended up coming back when things weren't progressing as planned. Kojima has always been a fan of integrating his personal experiences into the Metal Gear franchise. The Virtuous Mission takes place on August 24th, 1964, Kojima's first birthday. He originally intended the game to be set during the year of his birth, 1963, but he also wanted the Kennedy assassination to be part of the story. Naked Snake was apparently planned to have a physical constitution similar to Arnold Schwarzenegger. As well as being bulky, he was going to stand around 6 foot 5 feet tall. Snake Eater's new jungle environments included uneven terrain, which posed a problem for developers. The solution was to drop the collision engine used in previous games and create an entirely new one. The camera angle was also an issue in the game's original release. Some complained about the camera being restricted to a top-down view. Kojima explained the choice, saying he wanted to maintain consistency between the games. In an interview with IGN, Kojima admitted another factor in this decision. When the team experimented with the camera being behind Snake, he would feel sick. Like other Metal Gear games, MGS3 took inspiration from movies, books, and TV. Some pieces of media that inspired the game were George Orwell's 1984, Papillion, Dr. No, The Great Escape, and Richard Dawkins's The Selfish Gene. According to Kojima, the team would take overnight trips to brainstorm ideas for the game. On one of these trips, clips, he remembers seeing John McTiernan's film, Predator. The movie's jungle setting and camouflage mechanics heavily influenced the final game. After Metal Gear Solid 2 was completed, composer Harry Gregson Williams told Kojima that he didn't want to make high-tech sounding music anymore. Williams said that if the next game was set in the jungle, however, he might consider composing for it. Kojima told Williams he chose the jungle setting just to have Williams on board, even though a jungle theme was already being considered. It wasn't until all the music was composed that Kojima came clean. Kojima took the movie references one step further with the secret minigame, Snake vs. Monkey. The original 5 stages were titled as parodies of Escape from New York, the detective series Dragnet, 1968's Planet of the Apes, George Romero's Dawn of the Dead, Cape Fear, and Gone with the Wind. Though the North American and Japanese versions of Snake Eater contain 5 stages for Snake vs. Monkey, the European version of the game contains 2 additional levels, Return of the Living Apes and The Apes of Wrath. These additional levels were made due to the game's late release in Europe. This minigame was also meant to be family-friendly, with Snake immobilizing the apes with stun grenades instead of killing them. This isn't the only minigame hidden in MGS3 either. Guy Savage is a secret level that can be accessed after Snake is tortured by Colonel Volgan. Upon saving and reloading, a dream sequence will begin where the player is placed in the role of a dual-wielding swordsman. The game ends after a short time, or if the player dies. Though it is not known why the minigame was included in MGS3, Kojima initially wanted Gradius to be featured in this part of the game instead. According to writer Shuyo Murata, there was talk of the minigame being expanded into a standalone game of its own, but that idea was scrapped. If the player kills Ocelot, a game over screen with the words "Ocelot is dead" appears, slowly transforming into the words "Time Paradox." Colonel Campbell will also scold Snake for creating a time paradox.
Change the future. You've created a time paradox.
In the Japanese game, this is another subtle movie reference. Japanese voice actor Aono Takeshi, who plays Colonel Campbell, also provided the voice of Doc Brown in the Japanese release of Back to the Future. The movie's theme of preventing a time paradox also carries over to MGS3 through Takeshi's dialogue. A food item in MGS3 called Calorie Mate is actually for sale in Japan. It's a nutritional energy product available in various flavors and comes in a block, jelly, or canned form. When Snake uses this item, he fully regains stamina. Snake appeared in some co-branded ads with slogans such as, "If you want to survive, eat this," and "Even when you fight alone, you've got a mate." Kojima even mentioned that Snake's favorite is the chocolate-flavored Calorie Mate block. Interestingly, the game takes place nearly 2 decades before Calorie Mate even existed. The names of the Cobra unit were all based on emotions relating to war: pain, fear, fury, sorrow, and joy. The End was planned to be called The Doom. The name was changed, partly due to the prominence of the game Doom 3. Kojima originally wanted the fight against the End to be an intense tactical battle that would go on for weeks. After some experiments were conducted, he was told it would be impossible. The fight with the End can be difficult, but there are ways to easily defeat him. Snake can use his sniper rifle to pick off the End while he sits in his wheelchair on the dock. This will completely skip the sniper battle in the jungle, and Snake will have to fight Ocelot unit troops instead. Another easy way to beat the End is by reaching the area where his boss battle occurs, saving the game, and turning off the console. If the player reloads the save file after a week, or puts the system clock forward a week, the End will die of old age. One of the boss's earlier designs had a snake head tattoo on her exposed breast. This was so that when she fired a gun, her breast would jiggle and make the snake appear to be laughing. The river where Snake faces the sorrow was inspired by the River of Three Crossings, which refers to a Japanese Buddhist belief similar to the river Styx from Greek mythology. Kojima also planned for the sorrow to quote the Nose railway stops, an Easter egg that appeared in both Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2. The overall design for the Fear was based on character designer Yoji Shinkawa's initial design for Raiden. The very first concept of Raiden was a Spider-Man-like character who crawls on the floor on all fours. His personality was that of a weirdo who'd lick bird droppings, though Kojima rejected the idea immediately. In one scene, Snake is hit with a bolt coated in the venom of the Brazilian wandering spider. The Fear describes the grim effects of the venom to intimidate Snake, but he neglects to mention one effect of the venom. As well as causing intense pain, the venom also has similar properties to Viagra, giving the victim an erection.
Hello and welcome to Easter Egg Hunting, a show that dissects your favourite games looking for hidden secrets and Easter eggs. We're going to try our hardest to show you all and any Easter eggs that we can find in any game, and we'll even be throwing in a bit of trivia as well. This time we're going to be covering Metal Gear Solid on the original PlayStation, the classic stealth action video game directed by the great Hideo Kojima. Due to its very cinematic approach and strong sense of humour from Kojima, you'll be able to find many secrets and special bites of trivia all throughout the game. And due to the infamous lengths and contents of these games, this will be a long and tricky journey. So enough stalling and let's begin. If we listen to the Konami boot up screen, we can hear this pleasant little jingle. This jingle is actually an extract from a theme called End of the Dark from Kojima's previous works, Policenauts, a 1994 first-person point-and-click game from Kojima that focused a lot on cinematic gameplay and impeccable plot details, which then became typical traits for Kojima and then later rubbed off onto his future works. Pay attention, folks, because we're going to be making a lot of nods to Policenauts all throughout our journey. Once we get the game booted up to the main menu, we can actually screw around with the colours and the shapes in the background by messing with the directional buttons and analog sticks, which is pretty cool considering this is a, menu. Yeah. Anyway, once you've stopped playing with the menu, you get greeted with the game's credits. Not only is this bit of the game lovely and dramatic, but it turns out that most of these names presented to us on screen don't actually exist at all. Nearly all of these names, excluding David Hayter and Doug Stone, used pseudonyms because they weren't sure if the Metal Gear Solid project was supported by the Screen Actors Guild. But now is the time that we start talking about Metal Gear Solid: The Twin Snakes, the GameCube remake developed by Konami and Silicon Knights. Comparatively, in The Twin Snakes, all of the actors then used their real names, except for the actor for Grey Fox, as a different actor filled his role. Also, if you want to watch the mission briefing in The Twin Snakes, you'll notice that when Naomi describes the origins of the Genome Soldier project to Snake, he rather sarcastically responds to the idea, saying that it's like a dinosaur theme park, referencing the immensely popular 1990 novel and 1993 summer blockbuster, Jurassic Park. We're going to be making a lot of comparisons to The Twin Snakes before our journey is done, everybody, so keep your wits about you and try to keep up. Anyways, enough with pre-game shenanigans, because now we have to start playing and searching. The first thing we can find after we see the title screen is as follows. Within the game, you have to codec call Mei Ling on 140.96 in order to save your progress. By codec calling Mei Ling multiple times and pressing do not save, we can get her quite annoyed. On the third call, she'll express her distaste.
Come on, Snake, don't call me for no reason.
On the fourth call, she'll then say nothing at all. Keep calling her and choosing not to save until the sixth call, where she'll then not even give you a chance to save and then leave you alone by sticking her tongue out at you. Now that's not very nice. Carrying on with playing the game, after we get through the air vents and inside the Shadow Moses stronghold, give Master Miller a quick call. And then another one. And then another one. Keep on calling him and then he'll eventually begin rambling about bodily functions.
It's also important to be able to control your bodily functions. You never know when a long demo is about to begin. So make sure you're prepared to sit in front of the monitor for a long time if necessary.
Acting as self-referential mocking to the fact that this game has long cutscenes. Speaking about bodily functions, before the cutscene with the DARPA chief and Snake is sleuthing around in the vents, have a quick look for Meryl in one of the cells below.
Is that a woman? Not you.
Once you find her, you'll notice that she's doing some exercises on her prison bed. And now everybody, get ready for the tediousness. If you exit back where you came from and then come back to where you found Meryl, you'll then see her performing another exercise. Do it again, and then you'll see that she changes positions yet again. But then on the fourth time you do it, you'll see that... oh dear. Afterwards, once the DARPA chief ends up dying in front of Snake, the game will allow you a brief moment to explore his cell. If you crouch down and enter first-person view, look down towards his toilet and you can see some previously near-invisible maggots. They do hang around in a few other toilets as well, but the DARPA chief's toilet may be a foreshadowing to future events, as you later find his real body rotting in your own prison covered in maggots. Also, if you forgot, or you didn't find, the SOCOM pistol before meeting Meryl for the first time, instead of pulling a gun out at her head, Snake will instead simply put his hand on the tip of her FAMAS. Another thing to note at this portion of the game is that you can see that when Meryl attacked the guard and took his clothing, he's actually naked with his rear end blurred out. However, if you pop in the Japanese version and check the same body in the same place, he's simply in his underwear. Later in the game, we find out that this guard's name is Johnny Sasaki, which was actually the nickname of Hideki Sasaki, the game's character model designer. According to the developer's commentary in Metal Gear Solid Integral, Sasaki was infamous for his slack-off behavior in the workplace, and so he was included within the game as an in-joke for the team. Also, whenever Johnny is knocked out in-game, he's always found on the floor in exactly the same position, face down, with his rear pointed directly up at the stars. And now, I'll need to talk very quickly about Silicon Knights' last game before the Twin Snakes, Eternal Darkness Sanity's Requiem. This game is often considered a landmark for Nintendo, as it was the first M-rated game published directly under Nintendo itself for any of its systems. Due to its innovative sanity effects, it's also considered a landmark in survival horror, leading to Nintendo actually making a patent for those very effects. In this sense, this is a game that Silicon Knights were very proud of, leading to many nods and Easter eggs that are now ripe for the picking. For example, if we play the Twin Snakes, you'll find out that if you equip and place the book item on the floor and look down at it, you'll find an image of Alex Roivas, one of the main protagonists from the game. After all the excitement with the DARPA chief, we then head off to rescue Kenneth Baker, the president of ArmsTech. You'll notice that during the boss fight with Revolver Ocelot, whenever you shoot Baker, Ocelot will ask you, what are you aiming at? Also, if you shoot him to death or accidentally trip the wires around him, then instead of your normal game over screen, Ocelot will instead insult you, again, calling you an idiot.
You idiot!
Jerk. And then after all that, you need to contact Meryl, the Colonel's supposed niece. What's her number though? Well, to help you out, Colonel Campbell lovingly breaks the fourth wall for you about here.
Wasn't her frequency written on the back of the CD case?
Although, this is actually an idea taken from Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake on the MSX2, in which Campbell changes his frequency at one part of the game and tells you to check the back of the game's packaging for the new frequency. Many aspects from Metal Gear Solid are actually directly taken, or remade, from Metal Gear 2, but the similarities are too plentiful to mention, so we're only going to be pointing out the most significant and interesting ones in our quest. In this retrospect, in both Metal Gear 2 and Metal Gear Solid, Snake and his female contact both end up using the same exact frequency, and strangely enough, both end up romantically involved. Case in point, Snake and Holly in Metal Gear 2, and Snake and Meryl in Metal Gear Solid. Also, the character Deep Throat is a throwback, not only to the informant from the Watergate scandal, but also to Metal Gear 2, where an anonymous source calls Snake, and in both games they both turn out to be the character known as Grey Fox. Carrying on with the game, on a side note, if you call Naomi or Mei Ling while smoking your cigarettes, you'll actually get lectured by both of them.
Didn't you know that cigarettes contain benzopyrene, a chemical that leads to lung cancer?
In the story, once you hook up with Meryl, she'll then tell you that she's going to open the cargo door for you, allowing you to continue. However, more codec shenanigans can be performed if we keep on calling her before she gets the door open, and then she'll shout at you and call you impatient.
Don't be so impatient, settle down. I need a little more time to get the cargo door open.
Also, around this part of the game, flipping around to the Twin Snakes, a poster for Eternal Darkness featuring the main antagonist Pierce Augustus is visible in a locker in the second floor basement armory. And now, back to the story, because we need to go and find Dr. Hal Emmerich. If we check around the second floor basement of the nuclear building, we can actually find a room containing a Moai head statue, straight cut from Easter Island. How appropriate. It turns out that this is actually a running gag with Konami, as they've also included this head in as an in-joke for Gradius, Castlevania, and Snatcher, to name a few. Also, if we check around the same place, we can also see the words Hal's Lab Keep Out scrawled onto the door leading to Otacon's lab. Even though this is clearly a label, this may also be a reference to HAL Labs, where Kojima's close friend and game designer, Masahiro Sakurai, formerly worked at. Once we get inside the lab, however, we need to fight this ninja. During the fight, if we head up to the locker where Otacon is hiding in and knock on it, he will actually whimper in fear. Bless him. And then after the epic battle to the death with the ninja, we witness another very long cutscene. And this one begins with the ninja going completely ape and screaming this line. And it turns out that this line is actually a reference to the classic sci-fi action anime Akira.
Go back to the lab and get that medicine.
And now we've entered the first level of an Easter egg hunting paradise, all of which take place inside Otacon's lab. Going back to the Twin Snakes, after the fight with the ninja, wait for the cutscene with Otacon to finish and then feel free to look around. If you check behind where Otacon was standing, you'll notice two statues of Mario and Yoshi on the side. Shooting the Mario statue results in a 1-up sound effect and then a slight health increase. And then if we shoot the Yoshi statue, we hear the adorable little thing cry out, and although you get no bonus from it, it's still amazing. And now for a few comparisons. If you search around the office in the PlayStation version, you'll notice a PlayStation console on one of the desks. In the Twin Snakes, however, in the same place you'll notice a GameCube console with a Wavebird controller. Also, in the PlayStation version, check around the walls and you'll notice a Policenauts poster, whereas in the Twin Snakes, you'll instead find a poster for Zone of the Enders: The Second Runner. Also, in the Twin Snakes, if you check a magazine rack to the far southeast side of the lab, to the untrained eye, you may not be able to see the Eternal Darkness logo on one of the magazines. But give it a few more seconds and adjust your eye to the picture, and you may very nearly make it out among the muddy and bleak colours. See it yet? Another thing, on the PlayStation version, during the cutscenes with Otacon, he begins talking about his love for Japanese animation and robots, and during this bit it shows footage from Kojima's last game before this, which was, yes, another nod to Policenauts. Comparatively, in the same place cutscene with the Twin Snakes, you'll actually find that those clips of footage are changed to the Zone of the Enders too. The character of Hal Emmerich was also named after one of Kojima's favourite movie directors, Roland Emmerich, the director of famous disaster movies like Independence Day and the Godzilla remake. And his nickname was derived from the Japanese animation and culture convention, nearly identically named Otacon. And now, enough with that stuff, because we need to catch up to Meryl. As she is disguised as a genome soldier, you need to somehow point her out by looking at her... that thing. And then once you find her, she'll scamper off into the ladies' bathroom, where you then pursue her, and if you chase her fast enough, by the next cutscene, she wouldn't have had time to put her pants on, leaving her pretty exposed. However, if you step into the ladies' bathroom before you actually see her, whilst you're in there, give Mei Ling a call and prepare to be completely slaughtered.
That's a ladies' bathroom.
I know that. Saw Meryl come in here.
So you're waiting after her? Are you some kind of pervert? I won't let you save your mission now.
After another long and emotional cutscene, if you choose to stare at Meryl outside, she'll get rather embarrassed. If you just keep the first person button held down, she'll get increasingly embarrassed and progressively blush the more you look at her, until she goes nearly pure red. Only problem is this does take a long time.
Don't stare at me like that.
And then, I'd assume you feel very guilty about that, so now it's time to commit suicide. So let's do this creatively. If we go over to Meryl and punch her, she'll slap Snake back in retaliation. Keep on hitting her and keep on waiting her to slap you until eventually she'll literally slap Snake to death. And then, in the game over screen, grieve over his loss. After you get bored with Meryl slapping you about, we can carry on with the story as we have to head to the commander's room, which just so happens to be our second stop to an Easter egg hunting paradise. After the short scene where Meryl gets possessed by Mantis, try viewing the game in first-person mode. You'll find that the perspective switches to Meryl's vision instead of Snake's, which could be a foreshadowing to later events during the Mantis fight, where the first-person mode is then replaced by Mantis's view. Then, once you meet Mantis, he'll demonstrate his true psychic powers to Snake by, again, breaking the fourth wall. He says that he will read your mind, and by reading your mind he means by reading your memory card, where he will then search out and comment about any saved game data from other Konami titles. The following game saves, and probably some others, provoke responses: Castlevania Symphony of the Night, Silent Hill, ISS Soccer, Azure Dreams, Suikoden, and Poi Poi. And then, only on the Japanese version, Tokimeki Memorial, Policenauts, and Snatcher. In the Japanese version as well, if the player has save files from both Snatcher and Policenauts, it will trigger the following message. Psycho Mantis will say, "So, you like Kojima's works?" And then Kojima speaks in a voiceover saying, "Thank you for your continuing support." In the Twin Snakes, Mantis will read off of these save files: Eternal Darkness, Super Mario Sunshine, Super Smash Bros. Melee, and The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker.
Did you enjoy playing Eternal Darkness? You seem to like The Legend of Zelda, don't you? You've been playing Super Mario Sunshine, haven't you? So you've played Super Smash Bros. Melee before.
If the player has none of these game save datas in their memory card in both versions, Mantis will then say,
Your memory is completely clean.
Flipping over to the Twin Snakes again, you may have noticed that the visual psych-outs used in this portion of the game are very reminiscent of the sanity effects used in Eternal Darkness. Furthermore, several voice actors and actresses played roles in both the Metal Gear Solid series and Eternal Darkness, including David Hayter, Kim My Guest, Jennifer Hale, Cam Clark, Paul Eiding, and Greg Eagles. Back on the PS1, during the battle with Mantis, if you just can't figure out how to avoid Mantis's mind control, give Colonel Campbell a quick call, and then keep on calling him until the fourth call, where he'll then give you a little hint to defeating Mantis.
He's using his psychic ability to read your controller's moves. That's how he's evading your attack.
If we then decide to die without changing controller ports, you'll then get a call from him that reveals the true secret to defeating Mantis.
Plug your controller into controller port 2.
After the battle with Mantis, he then states that he is unsure whether or not Snake's and Meryl's futures lie together, which is actually alluding to the game's two endings, one in which Meryl survives and the other in which she dies. Also, the script in the original Japanese release had Mantis mention that his helping Snake on his deathbed felt nostalgic. though this was changed to "it feels kind of nice" in the English version. However, in the Twin Snakes, this was then changed back to the former. According to Hideo Kojima, the nostalgia that Mantis said he was feeling was due to him sensing his own mother's emotions during childbirth, where she had used the last of her dying strength to help her son survive, similar to Mantis's own actions towards helping Snake upon his death. And back on the Twin Snakes, if you check around the portraits in the commander's room, you may notice that the people portrayed are actually, in fact, Ryohei Kitamura, Dennis Dyack, and Hideo Kojima. Psycho Mantis's powers were actually inspired by another fictional character from the 1978 film, The Fury. After another long cutscene and some progress into the caves portion of the game, more stuff happens and everything seems to be going along just fine. Tragedy strikes. This is, of course, one of your many encounters with Sniper Wolf, shooting Meryl as bait to lure Snake out. According to Kojima, being a Stanley Kubrick fan, this specific scene with Meryl continuously getting shot in the open by a sniper rifle was based on the famous scene in Kubrick's war movie, Full Metal Jacket. After this, you'll be told to grab a sniper rifle to battle Wolf. But before you do this, at this point, flip on the Twin Snakes. If you shoot Meryl after she's been shot already by Wolf, you'll get some pretty angry responses from your teammates.
Snake, what the hell? Are you trying to kill Meryl?
Have you gone insane?
Keep on playing the Twin Snakes for this next bit as well. Once you get back to where you started, if you want to, have a lounge around the tank hangar. Due to the improved graphics on the Twin Snakes, you'll actually see that the graphics user interface is visible on many computers that you'll stumble into in the game. However, back on point, in the tank hangar, behind a level 2 door on the upper level, you'll actually find a computer with the Silicon Knights website on it. Pretty cool. Anyways, going back to the story. You've got the rifle and now need to fight Wolf. After beating her, you can then wander around this area for a second. If you start sniping the rats along the metal platform above where Wolf was, you'll get some mildly distressed calls from your teammates.
Snake, we don't need a rat trap. We need someone to stop that goddamn nuke from getting launched.
After everything seems dandy and you're ready to move on, you'll end up captured. Well, crap. So at this point, Snake will be thrown into a torture room where another cutscene plays. During this cutscene, you can hear Revolver Ocelot say,
"We're going to launch that nuke and ride it all the way into history."
As we've established that Kojima is indeed a Kubrick fan, this may also be a reference to the bomb riding scene from one of his great movies, Dr. Strangelove. And just before we get to the proper torture, Ocelot will warn you in-game,
"When your life reaches 0, the game is over. There are no continues, my friend."
And then along with this warning, if you've played the game and not saved that often, Ocelot will decide to taunt you and try to make you submit before you've even started.
It's been a long time since you saved your game. If your body can't survive the torture, it'll be game over. You really want to travel down that long road again? Come on, I won't tell. Why don't you just give up?
After your first lovely torture session with Ocelot, you'll get a chance to run around your cell. If we head up to the walls and knock on them, or if we just randomly hit circle to perform combos in the air, Johnny Sasaki, the guard watching you, will ask you politely to be quiet.
Shut up! Shut up in there, will ya?
Well, kind of. Hiding under the bed makes him also say this.
What the hell are you doing?
And then you can also have a go at calling Naomi whilst in the cell. If we do it at the right moment, we can get her to, yet again, break the fourth wall for us. She does this by telling you that she can heal your arm from the torture pains by telling you to place the controller on it and then let the vibrations soothe you back to health.
How does that feel, Snake? A little better?
How did you do that?
And now we can get up to all sorts of mischief as we can escape this cell in multiple ways. The first way is as follows. Wait for Johnny to head off to the bathroom or fall asleep. Whilst he isn't looking, hide under the bed. When he returns and notices that you're not there, he'll open the cell up and look for you and he's all confused and lost. It's quite cute. And then you can just sneak attack him and run away. The second way is to wait for Otacon or give him a call whilst in the cell, and then a few moments later he'll arrive to help you with some ketchup. Thanks, mate. All you need to do here is, again, wait for the opportune moment to be alone, then lie on the ground, equip the ketchup, use it, and then when Johnny returns, he'll think that you've committed suicide. He'll open the cell, check on you, and then you sneak attack him and run off again. The third way, however, involves waiting for Otacon again. By the way, in the torture, you can submit or resist either way to let any of these work, so don't worry. Just make sure that when you get the ketchup, use it like usual, but whilst Johnny is around to see you waste it.
What are you playing around with that ketchup for?
After that, he'll go into the bathroom again, and whilst he's gone, you'll then be rescued by the ninja who will slash the lock in the original and slice the door in half in the Twin Snakes. Also, if we escape the cell without killing or knocking out Johnny, he will end up chasing us. Once you get to the torture room, however, this will trigger a moment when Johnny has yet another bout of diarrhea and then rushes to the toilet. If you then follow him and knock on the door that he's in, he'll groan in pain. sickening. And just for another little thing, during the torture, if you take the lesser route and submit to it, you'll find that you'll actually catch Johnny's cold once you escape, leading to many humorous codec calls and recommendations on cold medicine. Trust me, it's all worth it to hear a bunged up Snake. Now, to carry on the hero's way, if we choose not to submit to the torture, Ocelot will plant a bomb in Snake's gear as escapism insurance, I guess. If we wait a while before throwing away Ocelot's time bomb that he rigged to our gear, Deep Throat will call Snake about 15 seconds before the bomb goes off, whereas in the Twin Snakes, it happens a little bit sooner than that.
Snake, there's a bomb planted in your items. Hurry, throw it away!
If we continue to wait, however, Campbell will then end up calling you and tell you exactly how to throw the thing away before it goes boom.
Select the bomb in the equipment window and press the circle button to throw it away.
Around this part of the game as well, give Master Miller a call whilst running around on a noisy surface. He'll then give you this little bit of advice.
There's a way to walk so your footsteps won't be heard. I call it stalking. Put your weight on the opposite foot that you're going to step with. Then, take a step so that your heel makes contact with the ground first. As you slowly lower the tip of your foot to the floor, gradually shift your weight onto that foot.
Snake then replies that he's frustrated and can't do it, to which Miller replies,
Another way is to wear your socks over your shoes.
In the Twin Snakes, however, this line ends up actually being changed.
In practical terms, you should be moving the control stick very gently.
After all that madness, things get even more mad when we have to fight a Hind D gunship of all things. Just before this battle though, when you first see the gunship itself, try calling Miller, and then you'll see that we get no response from him. This is actually a strong foreshadowing to Miller's true identity, as some of you already know. Then we can get to the actual battle, where another fourth wall codec moment can be performed here by calling Campbell, who will tell you, to help you out with locating the gunship, to listen out for the rotor blades of it with your stereo TV. However, setting the game sound to mono, or playing on a mono TV, provokes the following call of disbelief.
Huh? Snake, you're not using a stereo TV?
It can't be. A mono TV? Well, Colonel, there's nothing we can do about it.
Although after that little bit of degrading, Campbell will still reassure you that you can beat the Hind D without the use of a stereo television anyway.
There's more to being a good person than just having a stereo television.
Brilliant. Later onwards, we then become part of this nightmarish elevator ambush with stealth camouflaged assassins. This is, again, another throwback to Metal Gear 2, where nearly the exact same thing happens. In the game, these attackers were known as the Four Horsemen, but were nicknamed Ultravox, which was weirdly enough actually a tribute to the 70s British band Ultravox. After all that insanity, we have another battle with Sniper Wolf in a snowfield. When she hijacks your codec, she mentions a love letter being a bullet from her gun.
Well, I'm going to send you a love letter, my dear. Do you know what that is? It's a bullet straight from my gun to your heart.
Which Dennis Hopper's character in Blue Velvet, Frank Booth, also mentions.
I'll send you a love letter. Straight from my heart, fucker! You know what a love letter is? It's a bullet from a fucking gun!
After another long cutscene and after the epic battle itself, you can have a little nose around and you may notice that you can see a parachute caught tangled in a tree. This is actually the same parachute that Liquid used to escape the crashed Hind D that you just blew up. If you then end up looking directly at it, you'll trigger another call with Campbell.
I found a parachute near the wreckage of the Hind. A parachute? You don't think that Liquid survived?
Just for the giggles as well, repeatedly call Master Miller again around this point and see what he has to say, as well as a small squabble about hats and bandanas.
Over 70% of your body's warmth is lost through your head. Put on some kind of hat.
I hate hats. Is a bandana okay?
Well, I guess it's better than nothing.
He'll talk about the causes of pneumonia and when exactly is the ideal time that you shouldn't be playing video games.
In an Arctic environment, it's important to change your underwear if you're sweating a lot. You could even catch pneumonia. Gaming after a bath should be avoided.
Once you're done here, you'll need to carry on onwards to where Metal Gear Rex is being held. To do this though, you need to insert Disc 2. Do as prompted and then carry on like normal. However, if you go back to the snowfield on Disc 2, you'll then notice that Sniper Wolf's dead body has now been replaced with an excited wolf puppy. Now that's just adorable. Just remember that if we've missed anything, just let us know in the comments and we might make a tiny little bonus video just for you guys to make sure that we've secured all possible Easter eggs. We've killed Wolf, swapped discs, and seen a puppy. Now, enough fooling around because Metal Gear needs destroying. In the first area, the blast furnace, you need to shimmy along this wall over here. I'm sure that you're aware there's a really annoying crane here that you keep on having to duck under while you're shimmying along to avoid it. Well, it actually turns out you can make things much easier by blowing it to Kingdom Come. I didn't even think about doing that. Awesome. Going on to the next bit, killing all the Ravens before the boss fight with Vulcan Raven will provoke negative responses.
Snake, we're not paying you to be a scarecrow, you know.
Additionally, Raven will also be given an extra line when he meets Snake.
How dare you kill my friends?
Along with this, at this part of the game as well, all the references to crows will also be changed to ravens if Snake calls Miller first on the elevator where the supposed truth about Naomi is revealed. Master Miller will then correct Snake, who's been calling them crows this whole time.
Those aren't crows. Those are northern ravens.
And then a whole lot of other things happen, but our next point of interest pops up at the final boss level on the top of a broken Metal Gear Rex. Before this epic fight begins, we can hear Liquid yell,
"Have at you, Snake!"
As this is Konami, this could be a possible reference to Dracula's line in Castlevania Symphony of the Night.
But enough talk! Have at you!
This entire ending sequence can also be seen as another throwback to Metal Gear 2. In both endings, after you destroy each respective Metal Gear, an unarmed battle takes place with the pilot of each said machine, being Grey Fox in Metal Gear 2 and Liquid in Metal Gear Solid. Similarly also, both fights have Snake stripped of most of his gear. Except in Metal Gear 2, Snake is forced to dispose of it after it catches fire, and in Metal Gear Solid, Liquid strips his equipment off him himself. During the ending cutscene of the game, if you submitted to the torture earlier, Snake and Otacon will ride off on the secured snowmobile together. However, if you resisted the torture earlier, you ride off instead with Meryl. For bonus items, Meryl gives you the unlimited ammo bandana, and Otacon gives you the just as handy stealth camouflage. On your third playthrough of the game, you'll see that Snake changes into a tuxedo, which is an obvious homage to the James Bond series. Also, the ninja will have a different colour palette on his exoskeleton, changing to red and grey, looking a little bit like Spider-Man. Also, in Metal Gear Solid Integral and the Twin Snakes, you'll see that Meryl will also be wearing a sneaking suit. Another thing to notice on your third playthrough is this. During the ending credits, there will be different music playing over them, which is actually the Metal Gear Solid main theme, and this was the song featured in most of the trailers for the game, and more notably the one at the 1997 Electronic Entertainment Expo. Comparatively, in the Twin Snakes, the much simpler Alert theme from the second floor basement armory will instead play over the credits. And now for some other random things. In the PlayStation version of Metal Gear Solid Integral, there are two hidden codec frequencies, 140.07 and 140.66. 140.66 plays classic Metal Gear themes at certain areas, including Discovery, Zanzibar Breeze, and the theme of Solid Snake. 140.07 features really cool staff commentaries, but unfortunately this is only available in the Japanese version. And now for the big one, the one you've all been waiting for. If you were clever enough to find the digital camera after the torture scene from a hidden room near where Baker was being kept, you can search for the development team ghosts all throughout the game by taking pictures of random areas in the story. And to be honest, there are a lot of them. Over 40 of them actually. And with special thanks to a Chinese legend known as Wei Zi or Sun Ye for taking them, and this guy down here for uploading them to the internet, we are able to show you every one of these pictures, and I'll try my hardest to describe where each one is. So here we go. And by the way, I apologize deeply in advance for any incorrect and terrible pronunciations. Kazuki Muraoka can be found by the first ever tunnel that Snake swims through in the beginning of the game. Tomokazu Fukushima can be found at the heliport looking out to the sea from a cliff. Takanari Ishiyama can also be found at the heliport at the very top of the terrorist stronghold. Nobumitsu Tanaka can also be found on one of the sleeping guards at the western ground floor air duct entrance, where there's also a surveillance camera on the left. Kenichiro Shigeno can be found at the stairway surveillance camera on the right hand side of the building. Ryoko Yoshimura is stationed at the very end of the ground floor air duct, where a ration is also being kept. Atsuko Ito is hiding inside the elevator in the tank hangar whilst on your way to see the DARPA chief. Whereas Takashi Kitao is actually on top of the DARPA chief's dead body. Near here, Yoshitaro Kobayashi can be seen at the very far corner wall lounging around the holding cells that Johnny Sasaki was patrolling. Kohei Onoda can then be seen at one of the pillars inside the area where Kenneth Baker was being kept. And then Nobuyushi Nishimura can be seen, very dead, next to an also very dead Kenneth Baker. Ryoji Makimura is also around here at the southern wall in a secret armory room near where Baker was being kept, through one southern and then one eastern weakened wall. You can also grab yourself a PSG-1 here to save yourself a horrible backtrack later on. Masayuki Kobayashi can be found on the most northern one of the southeastern rocks in the canyon area. And then, in the canyon again, Shigehisa Kozyu can be found on the northeastern piped section on looking to the east of the canyon. Shinji Yamashita can then be seen inside the nuclear storage building on the left-hand side ground floor, near some columned nukes. And then, looking at one of the corners in the elevator in the nuke building, the man simply known as Fujimura is hiding inside. Yuji Korikado is then hiding on top of the guard, relieving himself in the men's bathroom of the first basement floor of the nuclear building. Yukiko Kaneda is creeping around the ladies' bathroom before the moment with Meryl, in the middle stationed mirror. Daizo Shikama is then hiding in the electrified floor room as you're looking onto the entrance to it. Yoshikazu Matsuhana can be seen on top of one of the dead genome soldier bodies in the room that the ninja visited. And also, the great Hideo frickin' Kojima can be seen on top of a police nose poster in Otacon's lab. So we're just going to finish off with all of the other ghost photos available from the last episode, and then finally a small section of Easter eggs that we might have missed, suggested by you in the comments. And as always, sorry for any poor pronunciations. Kunio Takabe can be found at Otacon's lab if you stand behind the glass shielding at the west of the lab, looking to the east. Note the police notes poster on the left-hand side for a better idea to match up. Hideki Sasaki can be found in the commander's room where you fight Mantis, looking straight onto the 3 pictures on the back wall. Yoriko Shimizu is hiding in the caves after you pass the first crawl space and look back at it towards the south where you entered from. Shiro Mukaide is north from the previous shot in a little side section of the caves with a small patch of snow and a puddle of water as you look on the floor. When taking this photo, ideally the small patch of snow near this puddle should be in the bottom right of the photo. Ikuya Nakamura is sneakily hiding on top of Meryl's spilled blood when you fight Wolf for the first time. And then in the same area, Yoji Shinkawa can be found at the very tower that Wolf was shooting you from, looking towards the west wall. Shigeo Okajima can be found on top of the DARPA chief's dead body in the prison cell after you're captured. Makoto Sanoyama can be found directly behind the torture machine after you escape, looking straight at the back of it. Kumi Seito is hiding on the comms tower A roof, right before you abseil down the side. There's some metal rectangular equipment in the middle of this area which you should stand southeast from and take the picture facing north to all the debris in front of you. Just as a pre-warning, Liquid will be shooting at you from the Hind D here, so be careful. Scott Dolph is a little bit difficult. After you abseil down comms tower A, you need to center yourself on the walkway between the north and south towers, as well as between the railings there. Face west and then point the camera down between the top and the middle bars of this railing. It's very difficult, so try matching it up to this photo. Takashi Kinbara is inside the warehouse entrance to the blast furnace in the snowfield, as you look down the staircase leading towards it, which is also where you change to the second disc. Motoyuki Yoshioka is at the blast furnace on the west side wall where the crane is, as you stand on an extruding piece of scaffolding where there was a guard. If the crane gets in the way of the shot, it doesn't matter. Hiroyuki Togo is in the steaming pipe room in the blast furnace, obtained by standing in between the 2 steam jets on the left side of the room, and looking at the northern wall where some Nikita missiles are hiding behind. Satoshi Hirano is at the first cargo elevator before you press the button for it, as you look over the north edge of it down towards the abyss. Motosada Mori is in the middle cargo elevator room by standing in the eastern elevator and taking a picture of the southern wall. Kazunobu Uehara is at the bottom of the cargo elevator chains, where you stand at the south end of the elevator, face north, and then take a picture of the first few ceiling lights. Soi Toyota is on the middle container in the room after you beat Raven, which can be done from any angle. Yutaka Negishi is hiding in the northern warehouse after Raven's fight, with all the turret cameras all up the walls. Throw a chaff grenade, run to the middle of the north to south connecting bridge, and then aim at the water flow to your left. Mineshi Kimura is on the highest floor of Rex's hangar as you head towards the platform towards the cockpit. Stand on that metal scaffolding, aim towards the railgun of Rex, and then take the picture, but make sure that you get the tip of the railgun within the frame. Ikiro Kutomi is in the command room where the PAL keys are entered, by looking at a southern monitor which looks a bit like a map. And finally, Takashi Misutani and a few other people are found in the supply route, where in the lower left there are 3 pairs of barrels. While standing with your back to the middle pair of them, aim at the southern set of them and then grab the last photo. However, make sure you throw a chaff grenade beforehand. As you can see, this totals up to 42 ghost pictures, meaning that these photos can fit perfectly onto 6 PS1 memory cards. However, a rumour about a 43rd ghost has also been floating around, where the game's translator, Jeremy Blaustein, can be found on Sniper Wolf's dead body in the snowfield. The theory is that he might have been removed due to the inconvenient additional use of a 7th memory card just for his one spare photo, and others say that because he might have been seen as just the translator, he may have been cut out entirely. However, almost no information has been disclosed, so it still remains a rumour and a mystery. And now for any Easter eggs that we might have missed ourselves, or ones that you guys have picked out for us in the comments. And again, these will be chronologically arranged. With thanks to this user over here, in the Twin Snakes, in one of the pre-game briefing videos, Campbell tells Snake the mission objectives, to which Snake replies,
So, someone needs to penetrate, gather intelligence, and report back. Sounds like a spy movie.
Which of course references the James Bond inspirations behind this game. With special thanks to this user, during the corridor before Otacon's lab, the ninja utters off-screen the names of train stations in the Myoken line, operated by Nosei Electric Railway in the Kansai region of Honshu, Japan. It does sound very vague, but he actually lists these following train stations, and again, sorry for any poor pronunciations. Kawanishi no Siguchi, Kenu no Bibashi, Takiyama, Uguisu no Mori, Suzumigataki, Tara, Hirano, Ikinotori, Uneno, Yamashita, Sasabe, Kofudai, Tokiwadai, and Myokenguchi. And with thanks to this user over here, flipping over to the Twin Snakes, as we get inside Otacon's lab itself, if we try not to get the screen destroyed during the ninja fight, the television next to the GameCube console on the desk will be displaying the GameCube home screen. Very cute. And one thing we completely glanced over and missed ourselves until the last minute was this. In Otacon's lab, still on the Twin Snakes, there is actually artwork visible from the Game Boy Color game Metal Gear Ghost Babel in the exact same area that you can find the Eternal Darkness logo. Back on the original, with thanks to this user over here, if you deliberately keep on dying during Mantis' fight, trigger the codec call with Campbell where he tells you how to beat Mantis via the controller ports. We did already cover this, but this is not what we're here to see. After you see that, die again, but we died loads of times just to be safe, and then he'll ask you a very humorous fourth wall question.
Snake, is there some reason you can't use controller port 2?
He'll then give you another secret to beating Mantis just in case you can't actually switch the ports around.
If you destroy the bases of those statues, you should be able to disturb Mantis' psychic powers.
And with thanks to this user over here, after this bit on the Twin Snakes, just before the first battle with Sniper Wolf, Meryl will help you across this small square of mines. If you just so happen to run into one of them, she'll actually laugh at you and slap her behind. Thanks. On the original, however, she'll simply shrug her shoulders.
What?
With special thanks to this user, if Snake fails to escape when using the ketchup bottle or does not use it at all, give Otacon a quick call. Due to not figuring out its true purpose, Snake will refuse to acknowledge Otacon's part in helping him escape in a codec call.
Looks like you escaped.
No thanks to you.
Too bad. I thought you'd be able to figure out what my plan was.
What are you talking about?
However, if Snake does succeed in using the ketchup bottle to escape, he'll tell Otacon in a codec call that he can't believe it actually worked. And finally, with special thanks to this user, during the final confrontation with Raven, if you give Master Miller a quick call, he discloses a lot of information about your past and informs you a lot about your ancestors, only to then reveal a little too much and risk his true identity.
There are even linguistic similarities between Athapascan languages and ancient Japanese. You and he probably share many of the same ancestors.
Master, I don't remember telling you that I was part Japanese.